Evening. Dylan once again arrived at Dumbledore's office and knocked on the heavy door. "Come in," called Dumbledore from inside. Dylan turned the doorknob and stepped into the warm, lamplit room. Dumbledore sat behind his massive oak desk, a benevolent smile on his face. His pale blue eyes lifted as Dylan entered. "Good evening, Professor." "Good evening, my boy. Come sit. Have some sweets." Dumbledore gestured toward a plate of confections sitting on the desk. Dylan walked over but shook his head. "I'll pass on the sweets. Is there something you wanted to discuss? Why did you ask me to come back tonight?" "Oh, ho, ho. Nothing urgent." Dumbledore chuckled and patted the chair across from him. "Please, sit." Dylan glanced at the space in front of the desk. There was no stool. He arched an eyebrow. Dumbledore's invitation seemed mischievous. Not to be outdone, Dylan reached into the pile of books on the desk, plucked one up, and tossed it aside. The instant the book left his hand, a strange light flared from it, flickered, and stabilized into an elegant, high-backed chair. "The properties that come from refined transfiguration are still very impressive," Dylan remarked as he lowered himself into it. Dumbledore looked surprised. "You've studied transfiguration in depth, it seems." Dylan cast a quick smile. "Not entirely. Professor McGonagall's teaching has been invaluable." Dumbledore stroked his beard. "Minerva told me she's run out of things to teach you." Dylan shook his head. "Not at all. There are insights I've yet to reach." His eyes drifted to the mirror on a stand behind the desk. The mirror of Erised? What did Dumbledore intend now? Was he about to make Dylan look into it? Dylan's face gave nothing away. He'd gazed into that mirror twice before, and nothing had changed. He wasn't worried it would reveal anything to him. Dumbledore smiled and nodded toward the glass. "Do you remember this mirror?" "Very clearly. It put the Philosopher's Stone into my pocket once. Maybe I should have run off with it." Dylan shrugged. Dumbledore laughed softly. "You joker." He sobered a little and addressed Dylan quietly. "Much of what's in the restricted section can warp a young mind, corrupt judgment, cloud reasoning. I'm concerned about how all that knowledge has affected you. Would you look into the mirror again for me?" Dylan raised his eyes. "Of course." Dumbledore continued, almost apologetically. "My reading of the dark arts in the restricted section was in part exploiting Lockhart's vanity. He's so full of bluster it makes my experiments possible. I only wanted to study some of it to defend against curses." "I understand." Dylan's tone was light. "I'll look." He stood, crossed the room, and turned to the mirror of Erised. As he stared, mist began to spread across the glass. The scene within the mirror sharpened. A tranquil forest, thin fog curling through the trees, dark shadows flitting between trunks. The view zoomed in to reveal a manor. It was Christmas time. Snow drifted lazily, colored lights wound around the porch rails, star-shaped bulbs twinkled. Icicles glittered beneath the eaves, and a decorated tree stood by the window. Inside the house, laughter and warmth poured out. Dylan saw himself walk out a door. He closed it quickly, so the room beyond remained unclear. In the living room, many familiar faces were gathered. His parents smiled as they chatted with Ficasco. Harry and Hermione sat nearby eating desserts. Ginny teased Ron, and the whole Weasley family was in bright spirits. Professors milled about. Dumbledore himself held a steaming drink beside Severus Snape. Laughter rose and fell like music. After Dylan stepped out, he walked to where Vera stood. Her auburn hair brushed her shoulders. In the mirror, she leaned toward him, lips parting as if to speak. Dylan smiled and inadvertently brushed her hand. They both startled, then stole shy glances at each other. A flush warmed Vera's cheeks. The scene was simply perfect. Dumbledore watched closely and said, gently teasing, "It seems, Dylan, that what you most desire is this: family, teachers, friends, and Vera?" A small twinkle danced in his eyes. "Our young man is as lively as I was in my youth." Dylan's mouth twitched. He kept his expression controlled despite a creeping redness in his cheeks. "Professor, am I finished?" "Of course, yes." Dumbledore smiled as if savoring the moment. Dylan drew a deep breath and hurried back from the mirror, nearly jogging to the chair he'd conjured. He sat stiffly and smoothed his robes, eager to shift the conversation. "Professor, have all the Aurors left Hogwarts?" Dumbledore nodded. "Yes. Lucius will have his hands full. Miss Vera took him away, and the other Aurors have departed." Dumbledore watched Dylan with a curious tilt of his head. "Aren't you going to ask why they left?" Dylan raised an eyebrow. There's nothing to ask. I'm not curious. Dumbledore shrugged, a little amused. Very well. Dylan's gaze rested on the sorting hat on the desk. Why had Dumbledore brought it out? Was he planning to attack him with a sword? He suppressed a grin. Dumbledore's voice grew serious. Do you know what Gryffindor's sacred relic is? Of course, the school histories record it. Gryffindor's sword, also one of the symbols of the house. Even the sorting hat originally belonged to Godric Gryffindor. Dumbledore inclined his head. Indeed, the sword is hidden within the sorting hat. Dylan blinked. When I asked the hat during the sorting ceremony about the house inheritances, it didn't tell me that. The sorting hat, which had been sitting quietly, spun and flung its brims wide open. You little lunatic, stop pretending. I already knew you had the sword back then. Dylan stared at the hat for a beat. The hat huffed. What do you want? You think you know where this is? This is the headmaster's office, of course, Dylan said with a laugh. You knew, but you gave me those looks anyway, thinking you could set me on fire with a hex because I called you out. What lie? I never said I didn't know the sword was in me, Dylan continued. If I stared at you, I wasn't attacking you, just curious. It's the first time I've had this close a conversation with a speaking hat. The sorting hat's drooping brim tilted. What's wrong with me? Dylan took it in, amused. You look a bit strange. If Malfoy's mug is an affront to nature's aesthetics, when you open your mouth, it's like a sneaker coming unglued. You looked profound at first, with that tattered look, but once you opened your mouth, no profundity left at all. The hat's fabric suddenly quivered, brim trembling as if with rage. Its mouth gaped open silently, and it looked even more ridiculous. Dylan stuck out his tongue. Now you look like a kraken from a story. The hat bristled and went rigid, peak pointing high. Dumbledore watched the hat being mocked and couldn't help a smile. He covered it with a cough and raised a finger to adjust his glasses, curious to see how Severus would react if he heard this. If one of them tossed a sarcastic barb at the other, the reply would be merciless. Enough, Dumbledore said. The hat can be troublesome when offended. We'll still need it after the summer for the sorting ceremonies. He winked at Dylan. Dylan checked himself. Sorry, I didn't mean to upset the hat. Professor McGonagall taught me one should always speak honestly. The sorting hat was too cross to reply. Dumbledore took over. Why don't you try assessing me then? Dylan nodded solemnly and peered at Dumbledore. Your forehead is broad, an indication of good fortune, and your glabella is clear, showing a steady mind. I'd wager you have at least another 100 years. Dumbledore burst into a delighted laugh. No wonder Minerva praises you. If Severus gave you such a reading, he must think highly of you, a Gryffindor. Dylan kept a straight face. No flattery, just reading what I see. All right, I believe you. Dumbledore touched the hat's tip, then glanced up at Dylan with a new question. Child, do you want to master the Holy Gryffindor sword? Dylan's surprise was genuine. The sword? Of course I'd like to hold it, but I'm a wizard, not a swordsman. He was lying to himself. Of course he wanted it. The sword, forged by Ragnarok I to Gryffindor's specifications, could absorb substances and strengthen itself and resist many spells. Even if Dylan wasn't a trained swordsman, a wizard wielding such a blade would not be unheard of. Still, he knew Dumbledore would never simply hand it over. Perhaps this was a test. He kept his face neutral. That's a pity, Dumbledore said, looking mildly disappointed. I had thought of asking you to keep the sorting hat. Me? Dylan raised his head. Why would you entrust it to me? Professor McGonagall seems far more fit. Logically, yes. Dumbledore smiled and shook his head. Then he looked at Dylan with frank, steady eyes. But none of us have your prophetic gift. I have a feeling Hogwarts will not be peaceful going forward. Tell me honestly, did you foresee this? Dylan nodded. I did, Professor, though I only had a vague vision that it wouldn't end badly. Dumbledore fell quiet for a moment and then nodded. I heard Harry say he gave you Tom's diary to examine. Yes. You saw nothing in the end? Dylan explained. I couldn't read the diary with my usual spells. It seemed protected, the diary itself as if enchanted. From what I've seen in the restricted section, and from what I could test, the diary contains a soul, cannot be destroyed by spells easily. All signs point to it being a Horcrux. A Horcrux? Dumbledore's brow tightened and a shadow passed across his face. If Tom Riddle's diary is a Horcrux, then my fears may be justified. Are you worried about Harry or about more crises to come? Dylan asked. Dumbledore's fingers paused on his spectacles. Both, perhaps. Do you have new prophecies? No. Dumbledore blinked. Then tell me what you think about Harry. Dylan hesitated, then spoke slowly. This isn't exactly a prophecy. I haven't done much divination lately. It drains me, but I piece things together from what I heard and saw. You mean Harry might be a Horcrux? Dumbledore asked softly. Yes, but not in the straightforward sense. Dylan's voice was thoughtful. A Horcrux requires a particular ritual, and Voldemort died when he tried to kill Harry and failed. He paused. So perhaps not a full Horcrux, but perhaps a piece of Voldemort's soul, torn loose by the killing curse, lodged inside Harry. I remember when Harry faced Professor Quirrell, and later when Voldemort tried to steal the stone, Harry complained of pains in his scar at those times. You think the piece of Voldemort's soul inside Harry reacts to Voldemort's presence? Dylan suggested. Dumbledore's expression went very still. His gentle features took on a heavier cast as the idea settled in. After Harry had told him about the figure in the diary that claimed to be Tom, Dumbledore had suspected the diary might be a Horcrux from Tom Riddle's school days and had wondered if Harry's Parseltongue and connection to Tom was merely influence. But Dylan's words drove that suspicion deeper. Could Harry himself contain a fragment of Voldemort's soul? Dumbledore let the silence hang between them for several breaths. Then he recovered his composure slowly. This is a grave thing to consider. Dylan, wanting to diffuse the tension, picked up the sorting hat and ran his fingers along its rim. Hey, you insolent brat, put me down, the hat squawked. I was only feeling the material, Dylan said, amused. After all these years, you're still preserved, if rather tattered. Your fabric is very durable. You said you might cut me, the hat sputtered. I don't like the sound of that. I haven't cut you, Dylan replied. Just curious, do you really not want to give the sword up? Ha, if you won't, then I don't care that much. The hat grew quiet for a beat, then said in a softer voice, You lied when you said you wanted Ravenclaw. I sensed you wanted Gryffindor all along. You're a mad little lion. Dylan smirked and dumped the hat back on Dumbledore's desk. Their banter made Dumbledore's eyes soften. Even his rare, indulgent chuckle escaped him. Yet there were more questions he needed answered. This incident may be over, he said, but perhaps not entirely. Do you have any premonition of the final outcome? Dylan tilted his head and glanced at the portraits lining the office walls. The painted faces watched him solemnly. Maybe. I saw everyone smiling. I think the ending will be good. No matter what, Hogwarts will still stand. That's what I saw, he added slowly. Dumbledore leaned back, silver hair shimmering as he settled. Minerva says your divinations are remarkably accurate, more so than Professor Trelawney's. I believe your vision will hold. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. Professor, is there anything else you want to ask? Harry, do you have a way to deal with him? Dumbledore asked. Dylan gave an embarrassed laugh. Professor, I don't want to deal with Harry. I'm only a second-year student trying to learn. Dumbledore chuckled. Of course. Off you go, then. You have much to study. Very well, Professor. Dylan stood. Dumbledore was already leaning back with his eyes closed. Dylan nodded once and left the office. As the heavy door shut, silence descended. Dumbledore's fingers folded across his chest. He sat motionless for a moment, then opened his eyes and studied the portraits. The painted heads of Hogwarts stirred and focused on him. An elderly head wearing a tall hat was first to speak, his voice deep and serious. The child is not simple. He hides his thoughts, but I do not think he is a bad child. Dumbledore smiled faintly. Dylan is clever. The mirror of Eris does not lie. A lady in an ornate robe crossed her arms. He's only in second year and already has such thoughts. Can we still say he's not a bad influence? A thin head near her pouted. What kind of bad child is this? If that makes one bad, then I'm utterly rotten. The lady rolled her eyes. Dumbledore listened to the chatter and felt the weight of the conversation settle on him. He grew thoughtful. In any case, the mirror doesn't lie. As for Karthus, we must look for other candidates. Chapter 162, Twins. Hey, why has this little girl never called us that before? When Dylan left Dumbledore's office, he headed straight for the Great Hall. It was dinner time, and Hogwarts felt like it was holding a celebration. Not a formal feast, so much as a hall full of people who had decided to pause and breathe. Everyone was talking at once, cheeks flushed, faces bright with a feverish kind of relief. Earlier that day, the students had packed to go home. They were supposed to catch the Hogwarts Express. But after a night of worry and uncertainty, a professor had announced that the term would continue. The mastermind behind the crisis had been dealt with. The petrified students would recover, and no one needed to go home. That news had lit everyone up. Dylan felt the atmosphere as soon as he stepped in. He smiled before he even reached the Gryffindor table. Harry was surrounded by friends. Neville waved him over the moment he saw him. "Brother Dylan," Neville called, his round face splitting into a grin. Ginny, who had just left Madame Pomfrey's office, was sitting between the Weasley twins. Her eyes brightened when she saw Dylan, and she returned his nod with a grin. Dylan stopped to ruffle her hair gently as he passed. Ginny froze for a moment, then flushed. "Brother Dylan, don't pat my head anymore," she said, half embarrassed, half scolding. "Fred and George said it'll stop me growing taller." Fred and George protested at once. "What kind of excuse is that? When we try to pat your head, you're the one who slaps our hands away." Ginny ignored them and smiled at Dylan. He had seen how lively she was during his stay at the Burrow, and he knew the diary of Tom Riddle had been in her possession. He hadn't interfered then. He knew she'd probably have been all right, even if he hadn't removed the diary and the basilisk, but he couldn't deny feeling a small twinge of guilt for not acting sooner when Tom's influence was growing. His voice softened. "How are you feeling? Any lingering problems?" Ginny shook her head quickly. "No. Madame Pomfrey checked me. She said my vitality and mind are back to normal. I don't have to stay in the infirmary." Dylan reached into his robe and pulled out a small crystal bottle. The liquid inside was as dark as a night sky with a faint inner glow. "This is Obsidian Recovery Potion," he said. "I brewed it myself. It should help restore your mental energy." Ginny's eyes widened. Without hesitation, she uncorked the bottle and drank it down. A cool warmth flowed through her. Her head cleared. Energy returned to her limbs. She squeezed her fists in renewed vigor and looked at Dylan with unfiltered gratitude. "I feel amazing. Is this yours? It's incredible." Fred practically leapt to his feet. "You brewed it yourself?" Dylan nodded. Before he could expand on it, George was already scheming. "You're a genius. Developing a new potion takes work and resources. If you could mass-produce something like this." Fred chimed in about the money and the stir it would cause in the wizarding world. Dylan let them get excited for a moment. "Professor Snape gave me a lot of potion recipes and guidance," he explained. "After learning to brew advanced potions, I wanted to try creating something new. If it ever sold, that would be a bonus." The twins' eyes practically gleamed. They talked fast, imagining markets and profits. Dylan was cautious. "It's not a finished formula yet. There's room for improvement, and selling potions is complicated. I don't have a reputation to lean on." "Use Snape's name," Fred advised eagerly. "He taught you. Have you ever seen a Slytherin get that kind of treatment from Snape?" George added. "If Snape backs it, people will buy it." Dylan hesitated. "I'll think about it. For now, it's not final." "Come to us if you decide to sell," the twins begged. Ginny, quick to help, offered, "My dad works at the ministry. He might have contacts." Dylan smiled. "Thanks. If I need help, I'll ask Mr. Weasley." The twins offered to be his agents. Dylan laughed. "If I do sell, I'll let you handle distribution. I'll give you 50% of the profits." Both of them spluttered. 50%? No, that's too much. We'll help, but we can't take half. You provided the materials for our talismans, and we split 50-50 back then. Why not now?" Dylan asked. Fred and George argued good-naturedly that potion sales were different. If he could sell elsewhere, they wouldn't be his only option. Eventually, Dylan relented, and they negotiated the usual twin theatrics: wholesale pricing, risk on the twins, Fred promising to borrow from their dad if needed. Dylan laughed and clapped both of them on the shoulders. "Don't worry. We can work it out when the time comes." Before leaving, Dylan told Ginny to come to him if anything strange happened. He was sure she was safe now, but he couldn't predict how things might change since his presence had altered the events. Ginny took the warning seriously. "Okay, Brother Dylan." Fred seized the moment and whined theatrically. "Oh, Brother Dylan, How sweet. Why has she never called us that? George joined in. We only ever got, Percy will thump you when we were little. Nothing like that. Ginny shot them a look and threatened to tell Mum and Dad if they kept teasing her. The twins pretended to tremble. The table dissolved into laughter. Dylan sat with Neville and stole a glance at the staff table. Dumbledore had arrived late, and the professors were in good spirits. McGonagall and Flitwick were engaged in a boisterous drinking contest. Sprout watched with amused delight. Snape scowled in the corner, and Trelawney was tucked away in one of her usual nooks, looking more subdued than when Dylan had spoken to her privately. When Dumbledore stood and raised his voice, the noise in the hall dwindled. He reiterated that there would be no curfew, though McGonagall had already announced it earlier, and the students erupted into cheers once more. The younger ones shouted and bounced in their seats. Slytherin's reaction was more mixed, some glad, others less enthused, but even they joined in the general hubbub. Dumbledore went on to thank students for their efforts. He singled out Neville for his work tending mandrakes and awarded Gryffindor an extra 100 points. Then, with a broad smile, he named Harry Potter and Ronald Weasley as those who had caught the culprit and awarded them 200 points each. The move catapulted Gryffindor to the top of the house standings. With Quidditch cancelled, there were few chances left to change the outcome, and the House Cup looked secure. Dumbledore's tone shifted as he spoke of Gilderoy Lockhart. He hinted, gently and ambiguously, that Lockhart might be unable to continue his public life. He had suffered misfortune, preventing him from continuing as Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. The hall quieted with a hush of sympathy. Many at Hogwarts liked Lockhart despite everything, and their tribute at the table was heartfelt, though some of the professor's toasts bordered on raucous mourning. Finally, Dumbledore addressed the strain everyone had been under this year and announced something that stunned the students. The final exams are canceled. Silence fell. Then the hall exploded. Students cheered, stood on benches, high-fived, and whistled. Even Hermione, practical as ever, allowed herself to celebrate. Ron made a particularly loud show of jubilation. Dylan smiled faintly but felt neutral. Whether exams happened or not didn't trouble him much. The real question was how the cancellation might affect his annual review. Last year, his exam success had brought him unexpected rewards. This year, he'd have to see how it all played out. Chapter 163. Achieve the End of School Achievement. Reward, Dementor's Kiss. Now you're really a Dementor. I can't believe the headmaster actually canceled the exams. The feast had lasted until nearly 3 or 4 in the morning, and most of the younger students were growing tired. Though many lingered in the Great Hall, some had already gone back to their dorms. With no curfew that night, students were free to move about the corridors and common rooms so long as they avoided explicitly forbidden areas. Dylan wanted to go back and rest. Aside from Seamus, who still wanted to chat with Dean and the others and enjoy the rare liveliness, everyone else, Harry, Ron, Neville, left the Great Hall with him. Neville flung himself onto his bed as soon as they reached the dormitory. While the academic exams can be waived, the OULs and NETs won't be, Neville said with a sigh. Dylan chuckled. You have a point. The OWLs will actually test us. Still, Dylan added, at least we don't have to take exams this time. True, Neville agreed. Ron, watching Neville echo Dylan, made a face and clicked his tongue. Dylan, Ginny seemed a bit upset by all this, but I heard Fred and the others say she was really happy to see you. Harry sat on his bed. Ginny's been avoiding me. She must be embarrassed, Ron said. Even if no one was seriously hurt this time, she probably feels guilty for getting us, and the whole school, caught up in it. Harry and Neville fell silent. Dylan tidied his things, cast a quick cleaning charm, and lay back on his bed. Look on the bright side, he said. With this experience, Ginny will probably become more composed and cautious. No real harm happened, and if she avoids future danger because of this, that's a good thing. Neville brightened. Dylan's right. Ron scratched his forehead. Dylan, you've got such a calm attitude. No wonder last summer, when you were at my house and somehow a bowl got broken, you were able to blame me without batting an eye. Dylan shrugged. I didn't say anything then. Mrs. Weasley insisted you were the culprit. What could I do? Why didn't you defend me? Ron pouted. I tried, Dylan said. But every time you tried to explain, Mrs. Weasley followed up with a scolding before I could even get a word in. Besides, didn't I restore the bowl? You put it on the very edge of the table, narrow path and all that." Ron pulled his quilt up, offended. "I do not know what you're talking about." After a pause, he added, "But I am a bit surprised the headmaster gave us extra points." Harry shrugged out of his robes and sat on his bed in his undershirt. "Professor Dumbledore said the details of this incident can't be made public. There might still be danger. So that's that, for now." Ron went quiet for a moment, then sighed. "I felt like I was hit and passed out straight away. Do you think the person who attacked me was Karthus?" Harry pulled the covers up and climbed in. "Probably. He's the only one I saw." "But why did he only take the basilisk and Tom Riddle's diary?" Ron asked. "He didn't take us, didn't touch Harry or Ginny, just knocked me out." Neville looked at Dylan. Maybe he didn't want to linger at the school. The other professors might notice and trap him in the Chamber of Secrets. Maybe he's only interested in Lord Voldemort and the basilisk and wanted them for research, Dylan suggested casually. "Isn't that even scarier?" Neville shivered. "Live research, ghastly," Ron nodded. "Daring to capture the Dark Lord for study and to take Slytherin's basilisk, that's bold. Did he study at Gryffindor, maybe?" Harry thought for a moment. Could he have been a Hogwarts student before? Maybe he showed up this time to deal with the heir and the chamber. "We don't know what he was after," Ron said. "He calls himself something like the Fool of Death. Doesn't sound like a good sort. A man who preaches death and uses unforgivable curses so easily. Hard to call him good," Ron continued. "I reckon he held back because he was wary of the professors." Dylan's eyelids twitched. Hold it in for now." "What's wrong? Your face is twitching," Neville asked. "Nothing," Dylan lied with a chuckle. "I'm just thinking about all the experiments I'll have to run tomorrow. It's giving me a headache." Harry nodded. "You should take care of your health, Dylan. Studying's important, but so is your body." He added, "I need to practice spells more, too. If I meet that Karthus again and freeze up like before, I won't be able to protect myself." Harry remembered the chamber, Karthus covered in eyes, that single look that left him unable to move. Urgency burned in him. The attacker hadn't targeted him this time, but next time could be different. If someone wanted to experiment on the basilisk and the diary, would they try to capture Harry, the one who could stand against Voldemort? They might stop at nothing, threatening the people closest to him. He vowed to study harder, catch up to Hermione, even if he couldn't overtake Dylan. "Hermione hasn't studied in months," he muttered to himself. "If I catch up, maybe I can close the gap, or even surpass her." Ron took a deep breath. "We've only been at Hogwarts 2 years, and we've been through a lot. I need to get stronger, too. If Ginny's in danger again, I don't want to be helpless." He glanced at Dylan and muttered, half to himself, "And today Ginny called Dylan Big Brother. She's never called me that." Dylan's mouth twitched inwardly. Ginny called him Big Brother because he had spent time with her over the summer, brought her treats, played with her, helped teach her magic when he could. The Weasley kids had been off on their brooms or mucking about with gnomes and hadn't really paid her that sort of attention. Dylan thought it was good Ron cared. He didn't discourage him. "You'll get there," he said. "You'll be the rising sun shattering the darkness. Go on." Ron grinned. "Thanks. I feel more confident now." "Too bad Hagrid wasn't free to come tonight," Harry said. "He would have loved this party." "Even Filch seemed cheered up," Ron agreed. "Shame Hagrid couldn't make it." Dylan turned away from the conversation, and after a while, the dormitory quieted. He didn't sleep. Instead, he opened his system panel. With Old Deng's announcement that exams were canceled, the system had prematurely triggered the year-end achievements. Dylan intended to collect what rewards he could. Achievement: Riddle's Torment. When the pain mask appears, who can compete? Requirement: make Riddle experience extreme pain and torment. Achievement reward: Dementor's Kiss, level 1, wizard version. At the reward line, Dylan froze. Dementor's Kiss? He blinked. I can learn Dementor's Kiss? How do I activate it? Do I have to kiss someone mouth to mouth? He thought about Dementors. They feed on happiness and good memories. Just their presence brings a deep cold and despair, forcing people to recall their worst moments. They were used by the Ministry to oversee Azkaban, but in truth, They obey whoever feeds them, and the cruelest will bend to someone crueler. Voldemort could control them with dark magics and promises. Dementors kiss drains a victim's soul. Afterward, they may live on without memories or self, an empty shell. Dylan wasn't sure whether the souls were destroyed or stored inside the Dementors, but the effect was ruinous. He extracted the reward. Instantly, his vision blurred, and a strange, deathly landscape swallowed him. He was walking through a swamp with Dementors flanking him. They were 3 meters tall, drifting in black cloaks, faces hidden beneath hoods. Their bodies were gray and decayed, as if rot had become corporeal. Pale, scabbed skin stretched over hollow sockets where eyes should be. Their mouths were shapeless holes that gurgled like dying throats. They followed him closely as he waded through murky water that splashed his robes. Ahead, a woman in a white dress stumbled and ran, mud staining her clothing. She kept looking back in terror at the Dementors closing in. She tripped and fell headfirst into the mire. Dylan walked up to her, crouched, and seized her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. Mud and tears streaked her face. He touched his lips with 2 fingers, then pressed them to hers. A faint tug of soul energy stirred as he drew memories into himself. He felt a rush of mental nourishment, beautiful recollections pouring in, leaving the woman in blunted agony. Her scream echoed as everything bright inside her was consumed. Dylan leaned further, savoring the intake, and watched the life in her eyes fade to unending sorrow. When the absorption finished, the woman was left bereft and hollow. Dylan stood, licked his lips, and felt a perverse satisfaction, as if he'd eaten a sumptuous meal. He resumed walking with the Dementors, hunting for the next victim. Dylan opened his eyes in his bed. New knowledge and sensations had settled into his mind. I really became a Dementor? He thought of his other spells, Evil Eye Cthulhu, a power that even Dementors feared, and compared them to this new ability. He now had something more Dementor-like than a Dementor in some ways. Did that mean he still needed to master the Patronus charm? He had been struggling with the Patronus. Unlike other magics he'd picked up, legilimency, sectum sempra, occlumency, the Patronus had been stubborn, like a tough bone wrapped in sinew he couldn't gnaw through. Maybe it was because he'd learned so much dark arts that the pure, happy, memory-driven Patronus resisted him. But if Umbridge could learn it, why not him? Maybe he should torment Tom Riddle more often, use the experience to manufacture a happy memory. He frowned at how absurd that sounded. He wasn't like Umbridge, who took pleasure in torment. The dark arts he used were tools to a purpose. Sometimes there might be a thrill, but not the kind that could be recorded as a happy memory. Taking everything too lightly isn't good either, he admitted. He scanned his panel. Dylan Hawkwood. Fiendfire Curse, Cheering Charm, Jinx, Obliviate, Soul Bob Tongue, Expulso Curse, Nether Mist Flying Shadow, Necromancer's Return, Bird Conjuring Charm, Sectum Sempra, Legilimency, Crucio, Imperio, Mors Mordra, Parasitic Possession, Putreflorifera, Rotten Flower, Nodding Curse, Bat Bogey Hex, Evil Eye Cthulhu, Avada Kedavra, Rictus Empra, Occlumency, Nemosynavale, Traits, Rapid Meditation, End Serpent Eye, Dementor's Kiss, Level 1, Wizard Version, Pet Ability Dominance, Underworld Mantis Intimidation, Spell Chain 50, Items, Shadow Ring, Authority Wand, Pet Space Suitcase. Money, 921 galleons. Pets, Coalball, Umber Shadow, Norberta, Norwegian Ridgeback. Dementor's Kiss appeared under traits, like End Serpent Eye, not listed among his spells. Dylan grinned a little. Any spell he casually used and put on the panel could turn him into a boastful show-off like Lockhart. He had been granted a huge array of powers and refinements. What could little Voldy use to fight me, he wondered. Still, he knew he wasn't done. Voldemort's repertoire was deep. Many of his spells were dark arts. Tom had researched himself. Voldemort's arsenal was richer, and between him and Old Deng, there was a lot Dylan still needed to learn. He thought of Tom Riddle in the diary. Riddle was currently rational. If Dylan forced him to teach spells, even if he offered false methods, Dylan could probably force a result. He checked unclaimed achievements. Achievement, a fairly perfect second year. Description, another school year has ended. Although your house has not yet won the House Cup, it's already decided. Requirement, subjects acknowledged by professors. Gryffindor wins the House Cup. Achievement reward, logical thinking +5, magic strength +5, mental strength +5. Achievement, seemingly first in grade. Though there was no assessment, your strong competitor Hermione hasn't studied for months. She likely wouldn't beat you, even if there had been an exam. Maintain first place at the end of the semester. Achievement reward, Lord Voldemort's random ability +1. Dylan scowled. No exams made my rewards worse. Still, a free spell or trait was something. He extracted the random Voldemort ability out of curiosity. The scene changed. He saw masked Death Eaters. He raised his hand and marked them with a symbol. Then a system message appeared. Message, congratulations on obtaining max-level spell. Nox Sinum, Dark Mark. Dylan's eyelids twitched. He'd hoped for something useful from Voldemort's deep pool and instead got a marking spell. He reminded himself it could be practical for tracking if he could hit his target. The mark seemed to have a range that expired beyond about 10 kilometers. Still, it was a max-level spell, and knowledge was valuable. He lay back on his bed, thinking ahead. Next year, when Sirius Black was captured, Dementors would likely be posted around Hogwarts again. That made him excited. He had the level 1 wizard version of Dementor's Kiss. Could he evolve into a Dementor himself someday? He mused that, although his current ability to pull out good memories or radiate oppressive gloom was weak compared to a real Dementor, he might, with the right spells he knew, Soulbob Tongue, Expulso, Necromancer's Return, Imperio, Evil Eye Cthulhu, affect or even subdue a Dementor. When he mastered Evil Eye Cthulhu, his illusions had driven Dementors away. He believed he could restrain one. If he could capture a Dementor, he could experiment on it, use Evil Eye Cthulhu until it feared him, just as he'd spammed Tom with spells, then control it. Dementors would be excellent for monitoring dangerous people, Death Eaters or other dark wizards, especially during events like the Quidditch World Cup. They were already used as jailers. Turning them into his messengers and guards made perfect sense. He'd need supervision for test subjects. Dementors would provide it without resorting to killing them. By third year, he could even apply for a time turner, another powerful tool. He'd studied how Hermione used one to save Buckbeak and wanted to understand them better. Outside the window, faint dawn light crept in. Dylan yawned. He couldn't stay up any longer, but he was relieved Old Deng had excused everyone from morning classes tomorrow. Tomorrow afternoon was a whole session of History of Magic, plenty of time to sleep and catch up. Chapter 164, Perfectly Refined, The 5 Traits of the Killing Curse. In the weeks before the holidays, Hogwarts felt unusually relaxed. Dylan spent his days reading, listening to Harry and Ron trade theories about Tom Riddle, and when no one was looking, slipping into his suitcase space to research how to brew an obsidian recovery potion with basilisk blood. After Dylan's relentless discipline of the basilisk, forcing it to watch the miserable state of its alleged master, the Hare of Slytherin, the creature had calmed down considerably. The final straw had been when Dylan unbound it to let it stretch its coils so its blood would remain vital. The basilisk had attempted to ambush him from behind. Naturally, Dylan responded by opening his evil eye, Cthulhu form, and ordering it in parcel tongue. Look me straight in the eyes. Back and forth, a complete re-education. If the basilisk had high magic resistance, Dylan would simply summon 1,000 small conjured birds and have them peck at its eyes one by one. They weren't phenomenally powerful like Fawkes, whose single claw could blind it, but repeatedly being poked in the eyes was agony, roughly the magical equivalent of constant heavy blows to a sensitive area. It didn't blind the basilisk, but the pain was excruciating. Since this basilisk was female, Dylan even transfigured a flock of birds into roosters and arranged them above, below, left and right of the snake, like sacrificial sentinels, the basilisk in the middle. Cluck, cluck, cluck! Cock-a-doodle-doo! Under Dylan's control, the basilisk could only endure the crowing and the relentless pecking. It trembled, but couldn't dodge. Dylan layered on more, Parseltongue commands, plus spells from his Worm Apocalypse repertoire to mentally pollute the beast, and his evil eye to keep it cowed. Ever since, the once untamable basilisk, which had resisted everyone else, even Riddle, now cowered at the sight of Dylan. As for Riddle actually giving it orders, that was another story best left in Riddle's nightmares. Dylan also brought Riddle out of the Wooden Shack laboratory to test the difference between Tom's Parseltongue and his own. The Horcrux's immunity to death gave Dylan plenty of room for experimentation. He burned the diary occasionally with fiendfire, conservative intensity, but enough to make Tom scream. He alternated fiendfire with Avada Kedavra, Crucio, Expulso, and even his evil eye. For almost an entire day, Tom's screams filled the room. During this process, Dylan maxed out all spell mastery tasks for Avada Kedavra. He also discovered something unexpectedly thrilling. His Bulbul Knot spell wasn't limited to physical targets. It could affect spirits and souls. If the target was male, even if he died and became a spirit, the spell could still torment him mentally and sensorially. Avada Kedavra and Crucio sometimes dulled on Tom. He learned to endure them, groaning instead of howling, but the Bulbul Knot never lost its sting. Every time Dylan paused from grinding killing curses, he hurled one of those special knots at Tom. For the next 50 Avada Kedavra castings, Dylan enjoyed the music of Tom's wails. Avada Kedavra! The 50th killing curse flared with holy light and struck the diary Horcrux. The diary burst into a raging inferno. Pages blackened and curled. The smell of burning filled the lab. Tom's spirit form, already fragile, was slammed to the floor by the impact. He collapsed at Dylan's feet. Once handsome, now contorted in pain and ferocity, his emerald eyes stripped of arrogance and instead dull with numbness. He wanted to fight back, to flee, to scheme, but had no power. He could not escape Dylan's grasp. For days, the only thing Dylan did was torment him. Tom's hair clung to his sweaty brow. His skin lay like translucent parchment over distorted muscle and bone. Prostrate, trembling, each spasm accompanied by a raw groan, Tom weakly dug ethereal nails into the floor, as if to cling to the last thread of life. His robes were tattered and wreathed in black smoke, and he could not even raise a hand. Dylan ignored Tom and checked his system panel. It displayed the spells he had unlocked and their traits. Spell, Transfiguration. Unlocked. Trait, Instantaneous Transformation. Instantaneous Transformation. When you use Transfiguration, the transformation completes instantly, no time delay. The moment you form the intent to cast, the target changes form. Spell Avada Kedavra unlocked traits. Louis Fentien, Corridor of the Dead, Annihilation Trajectory, Death Echo, Curse Resonance. Lang, when you cast the Killing Curse, you can autonomously activate or deactivate a circular destruction field centered on you with a radius of 4 meters and a duration of 4 seconds. Within this field, Avada Kedavra's energy permeates. 1 second causes sluggishness, 2 seconds paralysis, 3 seconds life harvest. Corridor of the Dead. Casting the Killing Curse creates a corridor between the spell and you, allowing you to instantly teleport, with the displacement not exceeding the range of that Killing Curse. Annihilation Trajectory. When you fire the Killing Curse, an Annihilation Rift lingers along the spell's path for 4 seconds. The rift scorches the soul of anyone it touches, making them feel their souls slowly burning away. If they escape in time, it won't directly kill them, but it will leave them tormented. Death Echo. If your Killing Curse misses, you can detonate the spell energy to form a Death Echo field lasting 4 seconds with a radius of 4 meters. Enemies inside take magical damage per second and have a chance to be frightened, interrupting spellcasting, causing spell backlash, or inducing flight. Curse Resonance. When you kill a target with your Killing Curse, part of their death resentment condenses into a curse mark. As these marks accumulate, the ranges and effects of your Luoyi Fentian and Death Echo expand, your Corridor of the Dead and Annihilation trajectories widen, and your Dark Lord aura grows more terrifying. Spell, Crucio unlocked traits. Unrelenting Pain, Crucio Hell, Spreading Pain. Unrelenting Pain, Crucio inflicts immediate agony and also leaves a lingering pain curse. The victim will suffer periodic spasms afterward, hampering mobility and mental stability. Crucio Hell, Crucio can be cast as an area effect centered on you, creating a circular field with a 4-meter radius and lasting 4 seconds. Every target inside is affected simultaneously. Spreading Pain. The angina inflicted by Crucio can transmit to up to 3 enemies within 4 meters, making them share in periodic spasms. Spell, Sectum Sempra unlocked traits. Shadowblade Disguise, Fated Pursuit. Shadowblade Disguise. You can conceal traces when you cast Sectum Sempra. Fated Pursuit. Sectum Sempra will pursue its target along the trajectory of fate, hitting precisely no matter dodges or teleports. Spell, Occlumency unlocked. Trait, Do you understand what you're reading? Do you understand what you're reading? When activated, this trait analyzes the magical logic of any intruding magic. Attempting magic will be scrambled and reorganized. Key thoughts you wish to hide are protected, and invading magic will become lost in a labyrinth of thought. These were the spell refinement traits Dylan had acquired. Not many, yet, but the killing curse was exceptional. It was the only spell with all traits unlocked, and by finishing the 4 refinement tasks for Avada Kedavra, Dylan had unlocked an extra 5th trait as a bonus. None of the 5 traits were useless. Luo Yi Fentian could open a mini-domain, transforming surroundings into an Avada Kedavra field. Corridor of the Dead allowed cost-free teleportation within the spell's reach. Dylan could basically fly as far as his killing curse could reach. He tested it and learned a quirk. If he fired 50 killing curses in a row, he couldn't chain infinite teleports because each corridor is fixed between him and the existing curse's range. Once he teleported, his position changed and the existing corridor no longer applied. Still, as a combat and pursuit tool, it was devastating, more useful than Voldemort's own flying spell in some situations. Either be killed by his killing curse, or be stalked and killed by it. Annihilation Trajectory left lingering rifts along each spell's path. Alone, they weren't lethal if avoided, but in enclosed spaces, or when many rifts overlapped from dozens of consecutive casts, they could turn an area into a death domain. Death Echo allowed Dylan to control and detonate spell energy when the killing curse missed, producing a damaging field that could instill fear and disrupt opponents' magic. Even spell backlash could result, and that alone could prove dangerous. Finally, Curse Resonance condensed souls killed by his killing curse into curse marks that expanded all the other traits. The entire system synergized. Dylan grinned. At least I didn't waste those 40,000 galleons. The castle prepared for the end-of-year feast and the House Cup ceremony. That afternoon, Charms class with Professor Flitwick was combined for Gryffindor and Slytherin. After the Chamber of Secrets crisis had been resolved, with Harry and Ron getting much of the credit, the Gryffindors were ecstatic. The house's pride in having a savior was nearly tangible. Slytherin, by contrast, was sullen, especially Draco Malfoy. His expression was long, with his father having failed to keep Dumbledore from retaining the headmaster post and having been kicked off the Board of Governors. Draco had lost his swagger. He had to swallow frequent contemptuous looks and insults. Even so, he still clung to whatever heirs he could. Time slipped by, and the holidays approached. Before leaving, the House Cup still needed to be awarded. Dylan and Neville went to the Great Hall together. It had been redecorated. Red banners hung proudly, since Gryffindor had held the House Cup last year. Dylan found a seat casually. "Looks like the colors set for the next few years," he muttered. Last year, the Great Hall had begun green because Slytherin had won the year before. After Dumbledore announced the winner, the hall had been quickly transformed into Gryffindor red. This year, with Gryffindor once again in the lead, no change was necessary. When everyone had arrived, Dumbledore rose at the staff table, voice warm. "This year, you've all been through many magical experiences. I have already spoken about them at our all-night meeting, so I will not dwell on them now. I hope the hardships you've faced will become the bricks and mortar of your growth." With a flick of his wand, brilliant golden text appeared, showing each house's scores. First place, unmistakably, was Gryffindor, 888 points, far ahead of the others. Ravenclaw followed with 325, Hufflepuff trailed with just over 200, and last was Slytherin with 69 points. Why such a wide gap? Harry and Ron had been focused on the chamber crisis and saving Hermione, and without their typical rule-breaking, they didn't lose points. Meanwhile, Dylan often made up for points Harry lost in potions class, sometimes doubling or tripling his contributions. And then there had been the all-night meeting where Dumbledore had awarded 500 points to Harry. Slytherin, on the other hand, had lost many points during the period Draco had been running rampant, especially when Dumbledore had been temporarily suspended and Draco treated the school as his personal playground. Professors had docked Slytherin heavily for that, so 69 was actually a mercy. Dumbledore let the students discuss briefly, then the golden text floated forward as he declared, "Let us congratulate Gryffindor on winning the House Cup." Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff applauded heartily. Slytherin's clapping was sparse. Many of the Slytherins kept their heads down, not daring to meet anyone's eyes. Malfoy's face was fixed in a miserable mask. His two cronies shifted awkwardly beside him. After dinner, back in the dormitory, Dylan began packing. Neville and Siamis had packed earlier. Once packed, they rarely unpacked until the next term. This time, there wasn't much to bring home. Dylan stashed most things in inventory, including the box itself, so he tidied up and organized the books into his portable magical library. Or, he said to Harry, give Ron and me your home address and phone number. Once you've been at home a few days, we'll call. Harry's face brightened instantly. Yes, wizarding families don't use phones, but Dylan, your parents aren't wizards. If you call the Dursleys, it's feasible. Harry's eyes lit up. Just say you're calling about something important. They won't dare to offend a wizard. Say your family misses me. That'll work. Ron, surprised, asked, call? Does my family even have a phone? Dylan shook his head. I think they do. Ron blinked. Then why haven't I seen it? Dylan grinned. I vaguely remember near the end of the summer Arthur Weasley secretly bringing a landline home. I think it's hidden in that small storage cupboard on the second floor. Ron's eyes widened. He actually got a muggle phone and kept it from us? Dylan shrugged. When I suggested parting ways, Mr. Weasley was even more reluctant because I told him I could help turn that phone into a kind of magic phone. There wasn't time to do it, though. I don't know if it's connected or modified. Go ask when you're home. Ron pouted. All right, but if my family has a phone, Harry, give me your number. Harry eagerly scribbled the Dursleys' number on 2 slips and handed them to Ron and Dylan. Call me the day after tomorrow if you can. I don't want to be there any longer than I have to. He rubbed his hands together anxiously. If you don't call, I'll have to endure 2 whole months of them. I feel like I'll collapse. Dylan laughed. Don't collapse yet. I'll call. Ron puffed his chest. Don't worry, Harry. I'll call too, but the day after tomorrow might be too soon. Your aunt and uncle won't just let you go. Harry agreed reluctantly. All right, then wait a bit. Just make it as soon as you can. Ron made an okay gesture. Neville and Siamis exchanged sympathetic looks. They felt for Harry but couldn't do much. They spent one more night at Hogwarts. Dylan woke early, as did Harry and Ron. Together with the others, and under Percy's direction, they left the castle and boarded the Hogwarts Express. Hagrid, released from his brief trouble, did not first run to tell Dumbledore or offer comfort to Harry. He had a different request. When Harry visited, Hagrid asked if Dylan could meet him in the Forbidden Forest that evening. Dylan hadn't collected Norberta's upkeep in a while. He wanted Hagrid and the dragon to reconnect after all the years Hagrid had cared for her. With Colball's help, Dylan snuck into the forest at night. Hagrid pressed a sack into his hands, 50,000 galleons and a large bag of fresh, high-quality meat, enough for Norberta for a month. Dylan nearly cried with gratitude. He thanked Hagrid on Norberta's behalf, laughing as he accepted both the money and the meat. When the express reached King's Cross, Harry reminded Ron, "It's best to have Mr. Arthur call me. Adults are treated with more respect." Ron nodded. Dylan can call first, and if they don't agree, we'll try other ways. Dylan glanced at them, said his goodbyes, and climbed into his car to go home. Chapter 165, Am I Your Son? Dylan wasn't in any hurry to inspect the house. It had been a while since he'd been home. The last few days had been a blur of work, experimenting on grotesque goblins, repeatedly casting unforgivable curses at a tomcat's diary, painstakingly flaying basilisk scales and draining its blood. He felt almost numb. All he wanted now was to go home, talk to his parents, and eat some of his mother's Western cooking. Surprisingly, after all the exotic meals he'd eaten at Hogwarts, he found himself missing his mother's plain Western dishes: potato salad, English muffins, shepherd's pie. There wasn't much variety, but everything was made by Mrs. Maeve. He'd been eating her food for years and had grown used to it. He stepped out of the car and hurried toward the villa. It was a summer afternoon, almost evening, but still warm. Cicadas chirped lazily in the trees lining the road. Leaves made a cool canopy overhead, and the late light filtered through in patches of gold. At the front door, he knocked gently. The door opened almost immediately. Hubert and Maeve's surprised faces filled the doorway. Maeve's eyes lit up, and she practically pushed Dylan into a hug. "Darling, You're back. Why didn't you tell us in advance so your father could pick you up at the station? She exclaimed. Dylan smiled and hugged her back. Don't trouble yourselves in this heat. I took a car. Besides, you and Dad gave me a lot of money, so I just took a taxi. Hubert grumbled. Those cars are so uncomfortable. Our own car is much better. Dylan blinked. Aren't you going to let me in? The air conditioning inside is on full blast. Maeve finally broke into movement, nodding. Oh goodness, I'm so excited. Come in, darling. She stepped aside. Dylan rubbed his fingers. He still had some egg residue from cooking, and walked in. The air conditioning hit him like a cool wall. Don't set the fan too high, he warned. You might catch a cold. Maeve nodded as if it were the sweetest thing. My darling's grown up. He cares for his parents now. Dylan's eyelids twitched. So I didn't care about you before? Maeve drifted off into the kitchen, her voice floating back. You always remind me of your grandfather. No, not cute at all. Dylan inhaled. Dad said British people are all very serious. Only those not very smart can be called cute. Hubert's eyes nearly popped out of his head. Feeling Maeve's glare from the kitchen, he threw up his hands in a panic. Wife, I never said that. No, that's not what I meant. Good heavens, who would say such things? He flailed for composure in an entirely unconvincing way. Although it's our son who said it, Dylan. How could you say such a thing? It's so ungentlemanly. He glared at Dylan, then turned back to Maeve. Of course, I must explain for our son. Perhaps by not very smart, he meant those who don't know how to appreciate you. Only they could be called cute. But you, my wife, you are my queen, the symbol of wisdom and beauty, truly heaven-sent. Hubert looked at Maeve with theatrical adoration. Please forgive our clumsy boy. Ever since he became a wizard, his mouth loves to blurt nonsense. Dylan stared. Defeated, he tried to change the subject. Can we eat now? I'm hungry. Oh, come quickly. Everything's ready, Maeve called, still watching Hubert. They stood there, eyes locked, as if trying to memorize each other's expressions. At Dylan's voice, Maeve snapped out of it and hurried in with a platter. Darling, look at this. It's a grand dish, she proclaimed, and Dylan saw it. On the platter lay a stargazy pie. Several fish had been arranged inside so that their heads protruded stubbornly through the crust, pointing straight up. Their round, glassy eyes seemed to stare at him. Under the warm yellow light, it was oddly macabre. Truly a grand dish. Dylan felt a memory flare. He'd once studied how a goblin reacted to putreflorifera, rotten flour. The fish heads looked unnervingly similar. Hubert beamed and took the pie from Maeve, setting it in front of Dylan. Come on, son, eat. Your mama made this especially for you. Maeve smiled softly. The light softened her face, and the little lines at her eyes gave her a seasoned charm that made Dylan pause. He let them have their moment. Then Maeve said in a stern but tender voice, Don't let Daddy snatch this food from darling. Dylan only comes home once in a while. If you want it, I'll make another pie for you next time. Hubert waved his hand dramatically. Oh no, my dear. I couldn't possibly let you slave away in the kitchen for me. I won't take this pie from Dylan. Then he turned back to Dylan and smiled. Son, hurry. Eat more. Dylan's internal voice. Am I still your son? He couldn't shake the feeling that these two old children, ever since Dylan got his Hogwarts letter, had become more lovey-dovey by the day. Were they in some second spring of life? Had they forgotten he existed? Was there a second account? The mental image made him wince, but he forced a smile and reached for a butter knife. He cut into the crust, trying to find an angle. Before he could bring a piece to his mouth, Hubert, who had uncharacteristically released his wife's waist, swiftly sliced off a larger piece and plopped it in front of Dylan. A fish head sat on top, staring up at him. Dylan's hand paused. Hubert chuckled. Eat more, son, or it'll all go to waste. Don't you like your mother's cooking? She woke up early to make this pie, and I helped all morning. Dylan snorted inwardly. So that's it. When he wrote home and said he'd come, Maeve had sprung up early to cook and dragged Hubert along so he could say he'd helped. The old man's performance read like a bad play. Dylan rolled his eyes behind his smile and stabbed the fisheye with his fork like he was pulling a mandrake. Eidolon Mentis, a spell he'd seen in an old grimoire, designed to affect perception, blind the eye to truth and replace it with something pleasant. The grotesque fish head in front of Dylan melted into a row of glossy salt and pepper prawns, shells shimmering with oil. The dead fish eyes became little flecks of seasoning, warm, aromatic, and very appetizing. That's more like it. Dylan ate heartily, spitting out crunchy shells that were, of course, oversized fish bones. After learning the spell, it had become unexpectedly useful. Those goblins were nasty to look at, many times worse than ordinary goblins, so when he was up to his elbows in their blood, Eidolon Mentis let him pretend he was looking at a piglet instead. It didn't make the work less messy, but it helped. Dylan bit clean through the prawn and sucked the meat and seasoning off the bone. Hubert watched, eyes wide. Dylan put the fork down and grinned. "It's really good, Dad. Try some. It's Mom's homemade delicacy. If you don't eat it, are you saying you don't appreciate her cooking?" Hubert's face froze. Ha! Ha! He was looking caught between horror and obligation. Dylan didn't let him off the hook. He carved off a piece of pie and placed it on his father's plate. "Sit down and eat. Why are you still standing?" Hubert swallowed and forced a smile. The fish head thing had haunted him since childhood. His mother had made him do the same, with nightmares to follow. Now, under his wife's gentle encouragement, "Your son served it to you. Use your fork. It's the child's thoughtfulness," he surrendered. "Yes, Dad, it's my heartfelt gift," Dylan added. Hubert steeled himself, reached for his fork, speared the fish head, and after a long pause took a bite. His cheeks worked mechanically. The smile was forced and a little painful. Dylan couldn't help thinking that his father wasn't eating a fish head so much as swallowing small, squeamish memories. "So," Hubert said after a shaky swallow, "with Lord Voldemort's Horcrux, I don't really need those cockroaches and spiders for spell refinement tasks anymore. I'll just get rid of them all, or release some into the forest." Dylan watched the effort it took his father to swallow the minced meat. Hubert reached for his drink and gulped deeply, trying to wash the awful taste away. Dylan laughed. "Do you want another piece, Dad?" "Oh no, this was made for you. Eat up, good boy. I'm fine." Hubert set his half-eaten fish head on the plate and tried to cover the staring eye with some vegetables. Wanting to change the subject, he said, "So, did anything interesting happen at school this semester? Tell your mother. Let us broaden our horizons." Maeve's eyes lit up. "Is there a big difference between your first and second year? Is the work too heavy? Your classmates and teachers even wrote to us." Dylan paused with a forkful of pie halfway to his mouth. "My classmates wrote to you? Who? I don't remember you mentioning that." Maeve blinked. "You didn't know?" Hubert interjected. "Professor Flitwick from Charms and a student named Vera sent us a letter together." Dylan narrowed his eyes. "And what did they say?" Maeve grinned, a little embarrassed. "They were so enthusiastic. They praised us for our excellent guidance in raising such an outstanding child." "Is that all?" "Of course not," Hubert said. "They also asked about your growth. These teachers are very responsible." "My growth?" Dylan echoed, puzzled, his fork hovering in midair. Chapter 166, Death Will Bless You. Hand over all your money. He had dinner with his parents and then slept all night. The sleep left Dylan feeling unusually refreshed. His spirit and energy were at their peak. "It's been a long time since I felt this relaxed," he thought, gazing out at the bright sunlight and the neatly tended garden surrounding the villa. At the start, Dylan had studied a wide variety of knowledge and spells, some for self-defense, others to probe the truth behind magic. As he mastered more spells, his power grew. The desperate quest to protect himself gradually shifted. He no longer viewed self-preservation as the sole purpose of his studies. Even if Lord Voldemort returned in full force, Dylan felt he could face him. During his duels with the professors, he had been holding back. If he unleashed his full strength, those professors would be overwhelmed in an instant. He wasn't overly worried about his own survival anymore. What he could not relax about, however, was his parents' safety. Still, it wasn't something to panic over constantly. He mainly wanted a stable environment for learning. If he chose to, he could take his parents and disappear to the ends of the earth where no one could threaten them. But that wasn't necessary. After the grueling initial phase of study, Dylan's achievements and talents had begun to accumulate and reveal themselves. He increasingly found himself drawn to exploring unknown knowledge on his own, whether from books or first-hand discovery. The mysteries of magic and the thrill of combining existing knowledge to uncover new things had become his driving force. Lots to do today. Let's go, he said after breakfast with his parents. Dylan had 3 main tasks planned for the next few days. First, he wanted to visit Muggle flea markets and shops to buy odd plants and creatures. He planned to plant them in his suitcase space, where an ecological self-circulation could form and the space would adjust to let the plants adapt. That would give him more experimental materials for biological research, questionable dark arts experiments, or seeing how Muggle creatures might affect potion brewing. If Muggle things touched magic, like the experiments Arthur had explored, what would happen? The sparks he referred to were the changes regular Muggle creatures might undergo when exposed to magic. Beyond research subjects, fruit trees that could bloom and bear fruit were interesting too. He could try to use magic, like enchanted fertilizer, to make their fruit tastier. Second, Dylan planned to go to Nocturne Alley. Among his recent achievements he'd been scanning, one caught his attention, an achievement he hadn't earned himself, but one his follower had completed. The achievement read, "Don't want to be the master's follower? Then get beaten." Dylan discovered who had completed it. Delphine. Apparently, the Ministry of Magic had recently released several dark wizards, and though many of them hid, Delphine had been brazen, openly provoking the Ministry. Dylan found several achievements she'd helped him complete, but what shocked him most was that Delphine had actually brainwashed Caractacus Burke, the owner of Borgin and Burke's, and turned him into her follower. That was significant. Borgin was from the Burke family, one of the sacred 28 pure-blood families, and a greedy, crafty dark wizard who had employed Lord Voldemort in the past. For Delphine to sway him into following the Fool was astonishing. Dylan had never met her, but seeing her name often in the achievements made her intriguing. He wanted to understand how Borgin could be so easily swayed. As a pureblood who trafficked in shady dealings out of Nocturne Alley, was he looking for a new figure to follow, someone to take Lord Voldemort's place? Or did Delphine's identity and connection to Voldemort play a role? After all, Voldemort had once worked at that shop. Could a former subordinate be persuaded to pledge loyalty to someone else? Dylan wanted to confirm his suspicions, and maybe pick up some extra money while he was at it. Based on past experience, Mr. Borgin is a slippery, small-minded sort, easy to turn if he sees profit, Dylan mused as he boarded a bus, sitting by the window and watching the scenery roll past. Besides visiting Nocturne Alley, he planned to inspect the manor he'd bought in Diagon Alley. Acquiring the animals and plants was the most troublesome part. He could have his father handle procurement, but Dylan's spatial pocket wasn't large enough for a mass influx, and large movements might attract ministry attention or Old Deng's notice. He didn't want to take that risk. If Hogwarts professors found out he was stockpiling creatures, who knew what trouble they'd whip up? He preferred to keep things discreet. He also wondered if Karthus's near-exclusive appearances during holidays would arouse Old Deng's suspicion. Dylan had appeared at Hogwarts as Karthus, stolen Voldemort's Horcrux, even taken the basilisk that threatened the school, and yet Old Deng hadn't made a major move. Using the mirror of Erised and Vera to test him showed Old Deng was suspicious, but he lacked evidence. Harry had mentioned Old Deng asked him to keep an eye on Dylan, which Dylan found absurd. The idea that Old Deng might suspect him of being Karthus was laughable. Dylan was a young wizard who just finished a harrowing second year. How could someone who brazenly used unforgivable curses be connected to a child? Even if Karthus appeared more often during the holidays, that proved nothing. From the Ministry's perspective, they might suspect a link to Hogwarts, which explained why Aurors had searched the school. The dark wizards themselves, worshipping the Fool, wouldn't imagine the Fool was a pupil. Hogwarts producing another Dark Lord seemed impossible, especially with Dumbledore in charge, and given how long it took Riddle to become Voldemort. First, Dylan stopped at a nearby flower and bird market. In the restroom, he transformed into an adult appearance and began buying small animals, slipping each into his suitcase space as if nothing had changed. After browsing, he put away the items, changed his appearance again, and left. He hailed a car to the farmer's market and bought many fruit seedlings, vegetables, and aquatic life. His space gained a lot more plants and creatures. He instructed Coleball and Norberta to take good care of the Muggle animals so they wouldn't be harmed by goblins or other pests after being placed. He kept only a few goblins for breeding and decided not to use the rest in experiments for now. Dylan hurried toward the leaky cauldron, wearing the shadow ring to stay invisible for the journey. Still unseen, he stepped onto his height-enhancing shoes, put on a mask, and pulled down a black hat. He followed a wizard from the leaky cauldron into Nocturne Alley and stopped in front of Borgin and Burke's. Through the slightly grimy display window, he watched Mr. Borgin busy inside, busy swindling fools. He saw Borgin and a customer exchange a plain trinket back and forth, and the customer leave with it, while Borgin pocketed a galleon, smiling broadly. After the man left, Dylan slipped into the open doorway and casually sat in a recliner in a corner of the shop. Borgin tucked away the galleon, hummed off key, picked up a rag from the counter, and pulled an identical item from under the counter to wipe clean. "Business has become even more prosperous while I was away," a deep, magnetic voice said behind him. The voice hit like thunder. Borgin trembled, and the skull ring in his hand clattered onto the counter. He turned and saw Dylan, shrouded in shadow. For a moment he froze, then fear melted into fawning devotion. His small, squinty eyes narrowed even more. "Oh, Lord Fool, I never expected you to grace us with your presence. My humble shop is honored," Borgin blurted. Dylan read the expression and saw that although Borgin had been swayed by Delphine, his loyalty was shallow and opportunistic. That was fine. More followers only meant broader faith and more achievements. Whether those achievements yielded good rewards was another matter. Dylan leaned back in the recliner, radiating an intimidating aura without raising his voice. "Do not be afraid, my follower. I have come to reward you." Borgin blinked. Reward? He'd expected demands for money, perhaps theft. He'd never expected a reward. He recalled their first meeting. This Karthus had caused a scene twice in Nocturne Alley and claimed he would reshape the world. That Karthus had not been short of money either. He simply took what he wanted. Yet at their first meeting, the fool had traded acromantula venom for galleons, venom that, while good, hadn't been worth the price, and Borgin had taken a loss. Since then, selling more venom had allowed Borgin to recoup some of it. Why had the fool done that? Liking? Manipulability? Borgin's eyes gleamed as he tried to figure it out. Dylan fixed his gaze through the mask and gave a cold smile. "My follower, you seem to have many thoughts about me." Borgin's ingratiating smile widened. "How could that be? Lord Fool, I am your most loyal follower. After your display of power last time, I had no doubt you would achieve your goal. The world will bow to you." Dylan's eyes flickered. "If that's the case, then before I reshape the world, hand over all your galleons, and death will bless you." Borgin's smile froze. "Lord Fool, I am your follower." Dylan nodded slowly. "So you should give me something, shouldn't you?" Borgin's face soured. It was like swallowing a lump of troll dung covered in flies, distaste mixed with revulsion. Dylan snorted. "It seems your faith in me isn't as devout as you claim. In that case..." Chapter 167, A Fool, a Madman. Before Dylan had finished speaking, Mr. Borgin's face had already drained of color. His Adam's apple bobbed, a fine sheen of sweat breaking out across his forehead. Strands of hair stuck to his greasy cheeks. "My Lord Fool, don't kill me. I'll give you all my wealth. I'm your most loyal servant, I swear on Merlin's name." Dylan raised an eyebrow. "Are you Merlin's underpants? You dare swear on his name." Mr. Borgin dropped to a cringing bow, a nauseatingly obsequious smile on his face. "If you wish, I can be your underpants." Dylan's mouth twitched. He suppressed his voice and snorted. With a lazy sweep of his left arm, a glass bottle appeared on the counter beside him. It was ordinary at first glance, not large, a thin film of condensation on its side, nothing obvious unless you looked closely. In fact, it had been enchanted with an undetectable extension charm. After Professor Flitwick had taught him the spell, Dylan had taken to turning all kinds of objects into little spatial treasures. It had become a small obsession. Mr. Borgin's eyes locked onto the bottle, and he cast a quick, cautious glance at Dylan. "Is this acromantula venom?" Dylan nodded, expression unreadable. He lifted the bottle, shook it gently. The condensation faded, and a ripple of thick, dark venom sloshed inside. A light of excitement pushed the fear from Mr. Borgin's face. His cheeks flushed, greed flaring in his eyes. He wasn't a fool. His presence in Tom's circles and the fact he'd managed to keep his shop open through every regime told its own story. Borgin's dealings had always been murky, and the same shop had survived before Voldemort's rise and still operated after his fall. He knew better than to assume safety from a man like this, until he saw that Dylan hadn't simply raised his hand to cast an unforgivable curse. Instead, Dylan had produced a bottle of venom, the same sort they'd traded before. Borgin understood. The fool wasn't here to kill him. He was here to reward him. His smile softened into something almost sincere. "My lord fool, this bottle's got an undetectable extension charm on it, doesn't it? Goodness, how many pints could be inside?" Mr. Borgin rubbed his hands together. "Let me guess, did you hunt 100 acromantulas?" "No, to be precise, 444. Dylan's voice came low from beneath his hood. "Those foolish creatures kept trying to attack me. I showed them death." Mr. Borgin gaped, then recovered into an exaggerated reaction. "Good heavens! Almost 500 acromantulas!" His gaze dropped back to the bottle. "So that would be close to 1,000 pints of venom." 888 pints, Dylan corrected. "I made them empty themselves until they died." A cruel curve touched his mouth. "Each of them gave me 2 pints. The image made Mr. Borgin shiver. He, of all people, traded in dangerous objects, but the casual cruelty in that statement struck a nerve. He looked up at Dylan, and only when he was convinced the other meant him no immediate harm did he relax a fraction. He hastened to flatter. "You're truly powerful. Such beasts. I'd have trouble handling one, yet you can command them with a flick. I admire you." Dylan wasn't interested in flattery. "Take this venom and process it. I want to see galleons placed before me." "You mean, you want me to sell it for you?" Borgin asked, bewildered. Dylan's brow knit. "Do you have a question?" "No, of course not. I'm more than happy to serve you." Borgin made 2 dry laughs. Dylan raised an eyebrow. "What? I've already rewarded you. Where's your gesture?" Mr. Borgin froze. Gesture? He was being asked to handle the venom and appear to sell it, but the money from the sale wouldn't be his. He would have expected a commission. The idea that he might have to pay to work, absurd. He felt a surge of indignation, but one look at the man who sat there as calmly as if he owned the world trimmed it down to trembling compliance. Borgin's fear glided into a more complicated fear. This fool was not like Voldemort. Voldemort had sought domination and demanded loyalty. Those who served often survived if they were useful. This man seemed to answer only to himself. He gave gifts and promises one moment and might cut a throat the next. A capricious monster could be worse than a dictator, Borgin thought. At least dictators kept a system. This fool had no system, only whims. He fumbled at his robes, producing a money pouch and presenting it with both hands. "My lord fool, this is my offering." He forced a smile. "These are the galleons from selling the venom you gave me last time." Dylan took the pouch casually and felt its weight. 20,000 galleons. More than the venom from last time should have fetched. He nodded, satisfied, set the bottle aside, rose, and walked toward the door. "Good. I'll be watching over you, Borgin. Don't disappoint me. On the day the world is remade, I hope to see you standing behind me." Mr. Borgin's body stiffened. Had the fool put an undetectable curse on him? The words were painfully familiar. Voldemort had spoken similarly to him once. Borgin had been cursed before, then spared only after long years of service. Hearing the same promise again made his throat tighten. Dylan paused, turned, and fixed him with cold eyes. Borgin started sweating anew. Dylan's gaze slid over his posture, his age. The Borgin family was one of the sacred 28, and while he knew dark magics, he probably wasn't the sort to sacrifice his own body for power. He looked old enough that abusing him wouldn't be noble. "Borgin, do you know Delphine?" Dylan asked. The question caught Borgin off guard. He scrambled for the right answer. "Know her? Of course I know her. Everyone pretends Miss Delphine isn't Lestrange by blood, but she absolutely is. As a pure-blood noble, Miss Delphine is Lestrange blood. She's the daughter of that one." Borgin's voice trembled with eager obeisance. "To receive Miss Delphine's worship and allegiance means you must be more powerful than he was. Fool! Death! Long live!" Dylan's gaze was a venomous snake sliding over his body, and Borgin shrank under it. "I'm interested in her identity. As for you, a member of a pure-blood family, if she chose you and you swear yourself to me, you may still be of use." The world is about to change, and the future will belong to the fool who praises death. With that, Dylan vanished like a gust of wind. The breeze brushed Borgin's cheek, and the last low words drifted away. Tell Delphine to keep all the galleons with you. I'll come for them myself. Borgin stood frozen in the empty shop. He didn't dare relax. There might still be unseen eyes watching. He moved to the counter and stayed there, trembling. He told himself he wasn't wrong the first time he saw Dylan. The Aurors would never catch him. If Dylan had come to him once, he would come again. Borgin had kept recent earnings on his person just in case. If Dylan dragged him to Gringotts, he'd be helpless. The Ministry's wanted posters were meaningless compared to real power. Borgin had seen how quickly people had turned on Voldemort. Only power mattered. Dylan's mastery of Unforgivable Curses alone suggested a dominance on par with, or different from, Voldemort's. One had an ideology, the other was a madman. Borgin suspected which of the two Dylan was. Alone at the counter, he rubbed the bottle the fool had left him and let his thoughts scatter into plans. So much acromantula venom could be more than just cash. There were other, darker profits to be made. He imagined processing, selling, padding his accounts, stashing away enough to bribe or buy favors before the fool returned. Better to be prepared. Meanwhile, Dylan left Nocturne Alley, slipped out of the leaky cauldron, shed his hood and mask, and entered Diagon Alley through the small courtyard. He went to Gringotts. The old goblin who had greeted him before spotted him instantly. A crease of pleasure appeared on his face, and he moved with surprising agility. "Mr. Dylan, we've been awaiting you," the goblin said in a sharp, pleasant tone, not loud. "Please, this way. You're here to confirm and sign the contract and inspect the property, yes?" The goblin's fingers fluttered in a welcoming gesture, almost ceremonial. "Yes, Hogwarts is on holiday, so I finally have time to see my home," Dylan replied. The goblin's eyes narrowed into smiling slits. "Holidays are good. Young wizards should take a break. That you come to see your property at once shows you care for it. You will have a bright future." Dylan noted a hint of condescension in the praise, but also knew goblins prized property above most virtues. He followed the goblin through the bright, bustling hall where coins seemed to tinkle in the air and goblins hurried between counters. They entered an elegantly finished private room, far finer than the bare private spaces he'd seen before, walls inlaid with gems, thick carpets that softened every footstep. The goblin's manner suggested he was being treated as an honored client. Magic arrays had been set about the room. Dylan felt a cool efficiency in the air instead of stuffiness. The goblin produced the deed Dylan had bought and set it before him to confirm. With a deft motion, the goblin fetched a stamp and pressed it on the contract. A flash of golden light burst from the seal. The edge of the paper ignited without heat. Golden flame licked across the contract and, instead of reducing it to ash, the fire remelted the document's words and fibers. As the flames converged, the contract condensed and reformed into a crystal-clear orb. Dylan lifted a brow. "A Fidelius charm? No. Something similar to the seal on the contract when I paid before, but not the same." Chapter 168, Gamp's Basic Law of Transformation, but Idealism. The small crystal ball on the table had a special spell woven into it that reached out and touched Dylan in a way he could almost not feel. If he hadn't been unusually sensitive to magic, his perception honed by constant study and system-granted skill points, he might have missed the faint tug entirely. It felt a little like the Fidelius charm, some ancient contract magic, and quite potent. As Dylan considered that, the goblin opposite him shifted. "Mr. Dylan, the spell is taking effect," he warned. "When this transaction concludes, my memory of your manor, and anyone else who knows about it, will be completely erased." Dylan blinked and nodded once. "All right." Watching the crystal ball pulse with light, he asked, casually, "This room blocks eavesdroppers, right?" The goblin nodded. "Yes. And if someone tried to use an unforgivable curse on us here?" The goblin's surprise was obvious. The glow from the crystal ball seemed to strip pieces from his recollection as he spoke. "Please be assured, no one will cast unforgivable curses in here, unless they want to be wanted by both Gringotts and the Ministry." "So you mean if we were attacked, there's nothing we could do?" Dylan raised an eyebrow. "No one will break in, and even if someone does, they won't break out," the goblin replied with an odd, half-pleased expression. Dylan's eyes narrowed. They'd have to get out to be discovered. The goblin nodded again. But there are only the two of us here. Who would use an unforgivable curse? You have nothing to worry. He never finished. Dylan's gaze slipped cold as iron and a subtle, precise magic poured out from him. He didn't raise his wand, lips didn't form words, no incantation was spoken, and still the imperious curse wrapped around the goblin like chains. The goblin's friendly smile froze. Color rushed from his face. He tried to fight it, but his body obeyed and locked in place. Dylan's eyes were empty as he fixed him with a stare. You? Goblin magic had a peculiar resilience. Under grim resistance, the goblin managed to force a word out, but the effort drained from him quickly, his features slackening into blankness. Dylan tilted his head. How much money do you have on you? 98,000 galleons, the goblin answered in a monotone. Oh? Dylan's interest piqued. Buying one property isn't enough, I think. Could you help me pay for a few more houses? The goblin's mouth worked. Of course. No problem. Mechanically, he began drafting contracts and counting out his 98,000 galleons. Dylan asked, mindlessly curious, How do you carry so much on you? A bonus I received today, the goblin said. Dylan guided him to fill out contracts for 5 additional properties. None were lavish. Collectively, they cost less than 100,000 galleons. One was hardly fit to live in, located in a muggle neighborhood. Another was a small property in a wizarding enclave and was the priciest of the lot. Dylan intended to use them as backup safe houses. One manor, he thought, wasn't secure enough. If only he had something like Howl's Moving Castle, able to go anywhere and instantly open into the desired place, that would be the perfect refuge. As the goblin scribbled and stamped, Dylan watched the crystal ball's contract magic at work. He could feel the contract spell, like a mist seeping into the goblin's mind, taking pieces with it. If Dylan had dispelled that mist now, he could have preserved whatever memories the goblin was losing. He didn't. Instead, he wrapped his own magic around it, learning the operating principles of this old spell while the goblin remained under Imperius. He let the process finish. Only when all contracts were signed did he release his hold. The goblin's expression fluttered. There were 6 crystal balls on the table, but he barely glanced at them as he gathered them up. Dylan had seeded the goblin's memory. When he left the room, the goblin would believe he had made the purchases because of his own enormous wealth. The goblin blinked and brightened, that obsequious grin returning, yellowed, pointed teeth showing. Excitement glittered in his tiny, bead-like eyes as he spoke in a thin, hoarse voice. Sir, you truly have remarkable foresight. 6 properties at once. Honestly, I haven't had a client this wealthy in a very long time. Your generosity means a fine commission for me, the goblin continued, bowing slightly. My sincerest thanks. Dylan waved a hand, smiling faintly. No need to, unless you'd like to return the commission to me. The goblin straightened. Oh, sir, our transaction is complete, as required by regulation, I must say. Choose Gringotts, the goblin intoned in a practiced sales pitch. Whether it's rare treasures or top-tier properties, whatever you desire, we can provide. Our safety and quality are exceptional. Sir, this way, please. He opened the door for Dylan and bowed him out, escorting him all the way to the main entrance. Dylan let him. That small commission had come out of the goblin's own pocket, and he wasn't about to rob somebody of their livelihood. He accepted the kindness of being walked out. When he stepped outside, the moon was already up. Dylan pouted to himself about the goblin's meager 98,000 galleons and that he'd had to pick mostly run-down properties, but the deals were done. 6 properties. He now alone knew their exact locations. There would be time to inspect them tomorrow. Tonight, he would plan how to arrange his new holdings, whether to make them all safe houses or choose one to be his permanent residence and leave the others as backups. He wondered, too, whether Karthus should have a property of his own. If Karthus ever gathered followers, he would need places to meet them, places to store those who collected galleons, for instance. Dylan rode home slowly, expecting some warm scene like yesterday. Instead, the house was cold and empty, no sign of either parent. On the dining table, a note sat held under a candlestick. He picked it up. His mother's handwriting smiled at him. Darling, your father and I went out to play. We might not be back tonight. If you're home and hungry, there's food in the kitchen. Don't stay up too late. Love, Maeve. He sighed. I only came back yesterday, one night, and they're already off again? In his bedroom, he tossed himself onto the bed and raised a different crystal ball, his own scrying sphere. It glowed a faint blue in his palm. Let's see when you two plan to give me a little brother or sister. As he fed power into the ball, the fog inside thinned and an image formed. Only his parents, sitting together on the living room sofa. No baby, nowhere to be seen. Relieved but oddly contemplative, Dylan let the vision fade. Maybe it didn't matter whether he had a sibling or not. Still, the fact that they hadn't had a child before he left for school nagged at him. Were they too old? Was his father's fertility an issue? He smacked his lips. Perhaps I should research potions for that sort of thing. Could be profitable. He tidied a little and lay back down, glancing at his achievement page. Achievement. So many properties. Who said I only have one house? Now 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Unlaw requirement. Own 5 or more properties. Achievement reward. Max level spell gift pack. Housekeeping edition. Note, the gift pack contains 10 spells. Dylan raised an eyebrow. A spell pack as a reward. Again. When he first started with the system, a beginner's pack had given him the 3 Unforgivable Curses. Now 10 max-level housekeeping spells awaited. It was the housekeeping version, not dark arts, but even so, it would fill gaps in his repertoire. He'd mostly studied dark arts and advanced magics. Housekeeping spells were things he'd only dabbled in. 10 max-level housekeeping spells would boost his proficiency and let him extrapolate to related spells. He opened the virtual gift box. The pack burst into golden motes, which flowed into his mind. Suddenly, he stood inside a messy room in his imagination, his wand already up. He cast, sweeping his arm. Dust rose, gathered, and streamed out through the doorway crack. Paper and clutter snapped back into place. Another flick. He repaired a broken chair. Its legs rejoined and cracks smoothed away. A wave at a patch of weeds, and they withered to powder. A mouse scurried from behind the sofa and under a light from his wand spun and hurried out the door. Cockroaches fled as if pursued. Murals bloomed on the walls, curtains brightened, new chandeliers lowered and shed a soft glow. The kitchen followed. Dylan pointed at a potato and murmured, "Peel and remove sprouts." The skin flew off into the bin. Slice evenly. Thin, uniform slices fell into neat rows. Heat oil. The pan bubbled. The slices turned into golden chips. Images and sensations cascaded until he blinked back to his room, and the system fed him the spell names. Scourgify, Reparo, Weed Wipe, Quick Decorate, Pest Repellent, Quick Peel, Slice All, Heat Oil, Quick Fry, Deep Fry Crisp. The system clearly classified culinary spells as housekeeping. Molly Weasley had taught him a few food charms. He hadn't expected to be granted mastery over so many at once. Dylan's thoughts drifted to Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration, what they'd learned at Hogwarts about 5 principal exceptions. In short, wizards couldn't conjure food out of nothing, couldn't create certain magical objects by simple transfiguration, couldn't change the fundamental quantity or essence of things, duplicates are flawed, couldn't raise the dead, and couldn't create something from nothing without preparation. Food, especially, was the first exception. You can't produce a delicious meal from nothing with pure transfiguration. But you could summon it if you knew where it was, or transform and enhance existing ingredients. That didn't mean the law was a brick wall, Dylan thought. It was a pattern, a strong regularity, but not an absolute ban. Summoning charms were a branch of transfiguration. They allowed him to call milk tea or cola into being, so long as some base ingredients or a connection existed. Conjuring a meal usually relied on ingredients and skilled cooking spells, exactly what the housekeeping pack provided. And beyond that, if one used transfiguration alongside other branches of magic and clever invention, one could approach things the law seemed to forbid. The Philosopher's Stone, if it existed and if its tales were true, was an example, an artifact of alchemy and enchantment that could transmute metals and grant unnatural longevity. Dylan believed the exceptions set limits only until someone researched past them. Desire, ingenuity, and audacity could reveal loopholes. Gamp's law might outline what generally couldn't be done, but Dylan had never been satisfied with generally. He smiled in the dark, fingers flexing, the new housekeeping spells settling into place in his mind. Rules were useful, but rules were also projects. Chapter 169, expand space, and create an ocean. Weeing is not a cat. He doesn't hate water at all. Dylan firmly believed there was always a loophole. That belief made him relentless in researching and studying the magic he hadn't yet mastered. Lying on his bed, he didn't go straight to sleep. Instead, he checked his galleon balance. At Gringotts, he had inspected his property and converted his pounds into galleons. If I'd known that in the Chamber of Secrets, as long as I didn't use any spells that could directly cause harm, the goblins wouldn't detect me. I'd have taken all their money ages ago, he mused. Money. 7,500 galleons. Just over 700,000, huh? If I felt like it, I could go to Gringotts every day and use harmless spells to siphon off goblin funds. No need to short Gringotts. That's a hassle. Better to make them hand it over willingly. He stroked his chin and briefly entertained the feasibility of the idea. Or, maybe it doesn't have to be me. If I could remotely control Lockhart like a puppet, he thought. The plan amused him, but for now he set it aside. He'd try to figure out the Imperio's mechanics later, and maybe avoid the extra trouble of creating a puppet. 700,000 plus galleons could expand the space by about 70,000 cubic meters, he calculated, then reached out, and the system prompt popped up. Message: do you want to spend 600,000 galleons to expand 60,000 cubic meters of space? Dylan didn't hesitate and hit purchase. Your current pet space is 250,670 million cubic meters. The number on the system made him restless. He dragged the suitcase to the bed, opened it, hung half his body over the mattress, and slipped inside, disappearing from the bedroom. The moment he entered the pet space, he felt a rush of openness. The place had grown dramatically. Glancing up, all he saw was forest, lush green canopy as far as he could see. Because his funds were limited and his suitcase's inhabitants weren't very diverse, the space could only support a basic ecological cycle, so he hadn't spent extra to create additional biomes. Each new ecosystem cost another 100,000 galleons. Who could afford that? He'd only managed to snatch 100 or 200,000 galleons once from an old goblin. The forest, which served as the core ecosystem, looked even more vibrant after the expansion. The system had obviously accounted for large creatures like Norberta. After all, the suitcase was meant to be a pet space. Even if other life forms existed, everything centered on his pets. He dropped down from the air. Tall, thick-trunked trees cast deep shadows as branches and leaves layered into a dense canopy. Faint phosphorescent glows winked here and there, the subtle lights of nocturnal fauna. A damp, earthy scent, mingled with the clean smell of grass and wood, drifted to his nose. With the expansion, more night creatures seemed active. The rustle of animals moving through undergrowth and foliage barely reached him. It sounded like running. A fiery red streak tore toward him, a blaze of heat that instantly cut through the night's chill. No introduction was necessary. Norberta, his Norwegian ridgeback, flew beside him. After 2 years, she'd grown a lot. In the dark, she was especially dazzling. Her huge wings beat continuously, whistling through the air. "Roar!" she cried. Seeing Dylan, Norberta landed excitedly. He grinned and stroked her head, then led her and the others toward the cabin. Near the wooden house, a basilisk stood in silence, massive, its triangular head held low. Normally menacing, the basilisk now showed a trace of fear in its vertical pupils when it saw Dylan. It tried to slump away and avoid his attention, but some spell on it seemed to keep it from moving freely. A dark shadow slid up behind Dylan and circled, ready to pounce, then froze. "Coalball, stop fooling around," Dylan said from the front. The shadow paused and stepped into view, an elegant umber shadow, almost one with the night, eyes like polished gems. "Moo," the creature complained, pouting. It padded proudly up to Dylan's feet and stuck its little head up. Only when Dylan bent and rubbed its body did it moo again and settle at his side. Dylan laughed softly. "Want me to take you for a walk?" Coalball's eyes brightened, but it still kept its dignity, lifting its head as if it had struggled hard before giving in. Then, with an exaggeratedly reluctant nod, it agreed. Dylan made a ridiculous face. "If you stay that tsundere, it'll be hard to find you a girlfriend. Moo." "Moo?" The umber shadow looked scandalized. Dylan whistled once, and in an instant his body shimmered. Wings erupted from his back and tough scales covered his skin. He shifted into a magnificent Norwegian ridgeback, bigger even than Norberta. He growled low and hooked a claw toward Coalball. It huffed, stamped the ground, and kicked up a few leaves, but when Dylan spread his wings as if about to take off, Coalball panicked and leapt up onto Dylan's back, clinging with its front paws around his neck. Dylan suppressed a smile as he beat his wings and lifted off. Roar! Norberta followed, and the two dragons streaked into the sky like meteors. Wind buffeted the forest below, scattering leaves. Norberta occasionally roared, her calls carried through the night. Coalball lay on Dylan's back, claws digging into his scales, ears flattened in anxiety. He was a little afraid of heights. He usually didn't mind flying with Norberta, but being on Dylan's back made him extra cautious. Yet he tried to keep up his aloof act, whiskers trembling just a bit. "Moo," he murmured, eyes wide as the scenery rushed by. Dylan didn't worry. He'd flown with Coalball several times and wouldn't let him fall. Besides, Coalball could become insubstantial. Falling wouldn't kill him. Dylan opened his wings and surged forward. Their speed climbed rapidly. Norberta gave a howl and matched his pace. The two dragons and the shadow soared above their familiar, newly strange realm. Below, sections of the forest were lit by a pale spill of moonlight that filtered through the canopy. Small animals stirred at Norberta's cries, racing through the grass. A handful of goblins, far fewer than before, looked up at the massive shapes overhead, froze with fear, and quickly ducked into the bushes. Swarms of Cornish pixies flitted through the trees. Too small for Dylan to harvest high-quality obsidian flowers from, they were merely useless buzzing nuisances he'd leave alone, save for the occasional cull like he'd done to goblins. The pixies panicked at the dragon's approach and vanished into the foliage. Dylan and Norberta made 3 wide circles over the world before descending back to the wooden house. "My flying form as a Norwegian ridgeback is getting pretty refined," Dylan admitted, pleased. The expanded space, more than twice the size it had been when he first got the suitcase, gave him a strange creator's pride. Back in human form, he watched Coalball hop down, paws wobbling a little, and almost laughed. He held it in. Tilted his head up, he considered his next move. "Let's open another ecosystem," he said to himself. Around 700,000 would cover expansion, plus something else. 600,000 to expand, and the remaining roughly 100,000 to create a new ecosystem. Not a bad plan. What ecosystem, though? He already had forest. Forests can include small lakes, and he could tweak a corner into a rainforest if he wanted, but a full rainforest was expensive. A small portion would still count as a new ecosystem and cost a full 100,000. Dylan didn't want to spend that much on a full rainforest. After thinking it over, he decided to create an ocean, a small sea. The space wasn't enormous, so a small sea would support many more life forms than another forest patch. Norberta and the others could hunt in it, and with a growth stimulant, he could make the fish fat and plentiful. That would ease his food expenses for Norberta. He paid 100,000 galleons. Instantly, his small world, which had been only forest moments before, began to ripple and shift. The ecosystem convulsed as if stirred by an invisible hand. Ground sank slowly along the edge of the space, and seawater surged in, foaming and churning. In seconds, a clear, silvered ocean lay before Dylan, moonlight painting its surface with shimmering ripples. The new sea swallowed part of the forest. Some towering trees were submerged and became drowned trunks. Others retreated inland. The inhabitants shifted to new zones, though the recent forest expansion hadn't yet produced huge numbers of creatures, so crowding wasn't a problem. Dylan hadn't made the ocean massive. It fit roughly the area he had just expanded. He was pleased with the small sea. Norberta and Coalball watched the transformation with excitement. The immobilized basilisk, however, had never seen such a thing, and it was utterly dumbfounded. Its head tried to lift to look at the water but couldn't. Its vertical pupils stared fixedly at the ocean, convinced it had never been so shocked in its life. How had this human conjured an ocean? It swore it couldn't be done. Dylan's power shattered its old assumptions and made it even more fearful. Norberta beat her massive wings and hovered, eyes like brass bells fixed on the sea. After a moment, she snorted hot air, curious but cautious, then glanced down at Dylan for permission. He nodded. "Roar!" she exclaimed, surprise turning to eager curiosity. With a mighty wing beat, she lunged toward the surface, then folded her wings and plunged headfirst into the water. Boom! Water roared up in a shimmering arc. Dylan watched as she twisted and turned beneath the surface, sometimes breaching and spraying seawater high into the air, sometimes diving deep, bubbles streaming after her. When she broke the surface again, a large fish clamped in her jaws splashed helplessly. Norberta tossed it skyward, then snapped it down whole with a triumphant roar. Dylan raised an eyebrow. So Norwegian ridgebacks, despite being dragons, aren't afraid of water at all, he observed, amused. He was tempted to dive in and play, but the sea was still small, more like a big lake, and his interest waned a bit. He looked down at Coalball, who was staring at the ocean with wide, unblinking eyes. Go on, play. You don't have to go to school or work, Dylan told him. Coalball glanced at Dylan, then, after getting his master's permission, transformed into a black blur and shot toward the water. Dylan watched the Umber Shadow sprint off toward the sea and nodded to himself. Indeed, Umber Shadow is not a cat. He doesn't dislike water at all. Chapter 170. Meet Lupin by chance? You're squatting in your student's home, Professor. The next morning, Dylan woke to find a note on the dining table. His parents were back. So you finally came home, it began. He crossed the room to read it, expecting some parental reminder about breakfast in the fridge. Instead, the note said, Son, your mother and I came back too late to cook anything. Could you make some food for us, put it in the fridge, and then get on with your day? We'll eat when we wake up. Dylan blinked and couldn't help a pout. He was speechless. Fortunately, no other wizards were around, and his magic wouldn't attract attention, even though he'd signed that ridiculous expulsion guarantee. He'd planned to get up and make fresh food anyway, so he might as well make some for his parents. In the kitchen, there was still plenty in the fridge. He didn't bother using his hands. Of the 10 max-level household spells he'd created the day before, several were food spells. With quick peel, slice all, heat pan cook oil, and quick fry fast cook, he produced a lavish breakfast in moments. He intentionally didn't use deep fry to crisp, too greasy first thing in the morning. He devoured his portion like a whirlwind. At the table, he produced a bottle of obsidian recovery potion, the highest grade, most effective potion he'd researched. He dripped a few drops into the plates he'd portioned for his parents and stirred until the potion mixed thoroughly. They're old enough, yet they stay out so late. Makes a person worry, he muttered. When he was done, he wrapped the plates tightly in cling film and put them in the fridge in plain sight. He straightened the contents so his parents would immediately notice the food. Then he used Scourgify on his dishes and put everything away before leaving the house. Dylan wanted to test the teleportation effect he'd been experimenting with, using the killing curse as a projectile. He put on his shadow ring and set his wand's special effects to colorless. He raised his wand and released an invisible surge of magic, a hidden, deathly howl that shot upward. His thoughts surged and the surrounding magic fluctuated wildly. Space shivered, the world snapped, and Dylan vanished from his original spot. He reappeared high in the sky, behind the killing curse's flight path. The wind blew his robes. The curse was already dying away into distance. Gravity took hold, and he began to fall, but he kept calm. Steadying himself, he fired another killing curse at a 45-degree angle. The projectile flew off, and as it did, Dylan's magic rippled again, and he shifted horizontally. He thought, tumbling through the air. Useful in a duel for surprise closing, but foolish for travel. The ground rushed up, and then, without warning, an invisible, transparent ripple caught him and arrested his fall. He hovered, hair and clothes whipping in the wind. He made a face. But even if I can suddenly close the distance in a duel, what then? Wizards don't usually fight at close quarters, unless I get my hands on Gryffindor's sword. He cast a flying spell and streaked toward his manor in Herefordshire, Hawkwood Manor, as he now called it. The place was vast, 82 acres, roughly 300,000 square meters. Now this is a proper manor, he admired, hovering over its center. He didn't immediately examine every building. Instead, he planned to use the Fidelius charm to hide the manor. A capable wizard could act as secret keeper for their own Fidelius and bury the location deep inside their soul, so Dylan set to work. His wand flashed. Invisible light burst from its tip, as he muttered incantations and traced the complex pattern in the air. The atmosphere thickened. It felt as if unseen cobwebs were pulling space taut. Around him, a vast, intricate magical array began to form, its threads reaching to enclose the estate. The garden and trees trembled under the pressure. Just as the spell reached its critical point, Dylan felt a hiccup in the casting. The array shuddered, and with a faint pop, the magic dissipated. "Even a nearly max-level Fidelius charm can't cover that much ground," he said, frowning. Hiding an entire 82-acre estate in one charm was beyond him. He could either raise his Fidelius proficiency to absolute mastery, perhaps later when he was older and his magic stronger, or split the manor into sections. Dylan chose the latter. He waved his wand and quickly enclosed the villa and the Quidditch pitch with a Fidelius charm, naming himself secret keeper for that section. The rest of the estate had muggle-repelling charms and normal protections. Ordinary muggles couldn't approach, and other wizards passing by would have no reason to suspect anything. For now, he'd secured the most important parts. "I'll find old Dengs when I have time and learn some anti-apparition charms," he mused. He hadn't even learned apparition properly. The spell wasn't in any book he'd found. To learn it, he'd likely have to be taught by professors, and they'd been cautious. McGonagall had told him that apparition must be taught carefully and gradually, not withheld forever, but given in measured stages with oversight. Dylan had to admit she was far-sighted. He took off the shadow ring and let his invisibility fade. The manor, though maintained by goblins from Gringotts, showed signs of sitting unused for a time, a thin film of dust layer, some dimness. A few flicks of his wand, and Scourgify worked along the walls and floors. The tiles and wood shone so bright they reflected his face. Magic flowed from him and scrubbed every corner. What had been old and dim became fresh and brilliant under the sunlight. He reflected on the difference between the max-level spells he'd obtained by raising his proficiency and the system's own notion of true max level. He'd maxed Scourgify through use, but when the system later rewarded him with a max-level Scourgify, he felt the two weren't identical. There was still room for improvement. Max level, he reasoned, wasn't necessarily the absolute endpoint. A spell at max level could gain new characteristics, new effects, effectively becoming a different spell. With spell refinement and secondary shaping, the technique McGonagall had taught him, even a maxed spell could be reshaped with new understanding. Its proficiency might reset, and the cycle could begin again. The possibilities intrigued him, but he filed the thought away for later. He walked past ordinary decorative murals left by the previous owner, and an idea struck him. "Why not make my manor like Hogwarts?" he thought. Not a school exactly, but a wizarding manor with moving portraits and murals that spoke, stored memories and personality, interacted like the portraits in the headmaster's office. Creating such portraits was akin to Horcrux-like memory storage without splitting the soul or killing innocence. Infuse a painting with memories, personality, and a wizard's knowledge, and it could converse and counsel. If old Dengs or another master artisan poured effort into them, the portraits could be as impressive as Hogwarts' own. He decided to write to the professors and ask them to help create a few before term started, though he didn't plan to hang them in the manor right away. He grinned at the thought of a Snape portrait and muttered, "I hope Professor Snape doesn't put his barbed tongue in the paint. He can't even argue me into a corner in person." He tidied the Quidditch pitch as he passed and thought about the manor as a backup station for his pet space. Mature plants and animals could be harvested into his space. Even if he poured 1,000,000 galleons into activating the space's self-circulation, it still wouldn't be enough diversity right away. Time would do the rest. After securing the manor, he flew to a small, dilapidated house in a wizarding enclave and cast the Fidelius charm on it too. He left it as is. It was only a safe house for emergencies, not someplace he intended to live. Then he went home. At dinner, his parents had laid out a full spread. "Finally, you remember your son," his mother teased. They chatted, and he gave them some wizarding trinkets, including some Bertie Bott's every flavor beans in interesting flavors. As he walked to his room, he heard his parents start laughing sweetly again and smiled. "I hope you two like them," he thought, amused. In the following days, Dylan set up more safe houses and made portkeys for them. He had no intention of registering any with the ministry's portkey office. Creating portkeys without approval was illegal, but the ministry rarely detected unauthorized portkeys unless someone reported them or a use attracted Muggle attention. With Fidelius' charms on his safe houses and discretion on his part, detection seemed unlikely. Once he had properties on several continents connected by portkeys, they'd be an anywhere door. By then, he'd Fidelius's 3 of his 5 properties. When he arrived at the next one, the most dilapidated of them, he paused. He always used divination before entering. Caution cost nothing. This time, during the divination, he saw himself entering the house and finding someone huddled in a corner. In the vision, they started to fight. In the end, he imagined himself using Imperio to control the other person. When he pried that image apart, he discovered the intruder's identity. Professor Remus John Lupin, the man who would be his Defense Against the Dark Arts professor in his 3rd year. Dylan materialized outside the property, wearing the shadow ring, and peered up at the derelict stone house. Its walls were weathered and weeds pushed through cracks. Roof tiles were missing, letting light stream into the rooms. A window hung crookedly with only a half pane like a hollow eye. He hesitated. Lupin, being a werewolf, had difficulty finding steady paid work and was scraping by with odd jobs. Lupin would be his Dada professor when term resumed. They would inevitably meet at Hogwarts. If Dylan barged in now, would he expel, maim, or erase the man's memory? Would that ruin Old Deng's chances of recruiting Lupin as a professor? Too many complications for no good reason. He retreated quietly. As he walked away, a head appeared in the half-pane window. Hair rumpled, eyes tired, an old robe hanging loose. Lupin peered out with a flicker of confusion, scanned the surrounding scrubland, and finding nothing, drew back inside. Dylan left that property untouched. He didn't go immediately to the final safe house. Instead, he returned home and spent a calm month with his parents. On July 31st, he went to the last property, a house in a Muggle neighborhood in Surrey, number 9 Wisteria Walk in Little Whinging, very near number 4 Privet Drive. He cast the Fidelius charm and clapped his hands. I should have had that goblin get me one more property. Then this could have been Vault 7, he said, thinking of the number 7's magical reputation. 7 was the number Voldemort favored for his Horcruxes. Many spells and potions used 7s. Dylan's Obsidian Recovery Potion had 7 ingredients in its best formulation. The number carried weight. He blinked. But Harry's technically Voldemort's 6th Horcrux, and this is my last safe house, so it's Vault 6. And it's near Harry's house. Not my arrangement, perhaps, but a destined coincidence. That struck him as fortunate. He smacked his lips and added, It's 1993 now. Next year, Nagini will be turned into a Horcrux by Voldemort. Right now, I don't even know where she is. He'd been curious whether Nagini, afflicted by a blood curse and regressing to animal form and losing human memory, could be restored. But Nagini's role would unfold in the next year. He'd wait and study it then. Chapter 171. Harry, just use these prank props. Aren't they better than magic? Good thing this is a Muggle neighborhood, unlike other places where homeless wizards can just move into any empty house they find. After stashing away the last safe house, Dylan walked on and soon found himself at 4 Privet Drive. Since today was Harry's birthday, he had chosen this moment specifically to check on him. It wasn't entirely true that he'd promised to call early and kept delaying, though every time he meant to, he'd put it off with, I'll call in 2 days. Days rolled into weeks, and before he knew it, more than a month had slipped by. Thanks to a recent letter from Ron, reminding him that Ron wanted to invite Dylan to the Burrow again, and ending with the question of whether he'd called Harry, Dylan finally remembered the house he'd meant to visit. He'd written back, saying he'd come on July 31st with a present for Harry. He'd claimed he hadn't called because he wanted it to be a surprise. It was a flimsy excuse, but Harry was still a kid. A small one would do. Dylan knocked. He didn't press the doorbell. Something greasy and suspicious clung to it, discouraging anyone from touching it. No one answered at first. He knocked louder. The door opened slowly, and a fat, grim-faced man filled the frame, Vernon Dursley. Vernon glared, impatient. "Who are you?" "Hello," Dylan said. Could you tell Harry his classmate is here to see him? The moment Vernon heard Harry, his expression twisted. Like an angry dog whose tail had been stepped on, he barked, "There's no Harry Potter here. Get out and don't come back." He slammed the door. Dylan waited a beat, then peered through the crack and towards the commotion inside. He wasn't surprised by stories of the Dursleys' cruelty, but he hadn't expected such an extreme reaction the instant the name Harry was mentioned. Narrowing his eyes, Dylan was about to use a silent, wandless jinx when voices rose inside the house. Vernon roaring and Harry shouting back. The lock clicked and the door opened again. Harry stood there, surprised and smiling. "I just walked by and heard someone. I thought I'd imagined it." "Dylan, why are you here?" Dylan returned the smile and reached into his shoulder bag. "Happy birthday, Harry. This is for you." He placed a marble-sized blue crystal in Harry's palm. "Wow, it's beautiful," Harry said, blinking. "Keep it with you," Dylan told him. "I made it using some ancient runes. If you run into bad luck, it might turn things around." The gem was a crude heart-guarding stone, an idea Dylan had come up with while researching the Patronus. He hadn't mastered the Patronus charm, but he could weave a few stabilizing enchantments into a gem. Spells to calm the mind, resist the chill of Dementors a little, and even help deflect weaker spells by skewing their aim at the last moment. It wouldn't create an impenetrable shield, but nudging a spell to miss could be life-saving. It was not, of course, useful against hordes of corpses or very powerful magic. Dylan had also made the gem into a portkey as a backup, just in case something went terribly wrong. Worried that unpredictable consequences might follow from his presence in Harry's world, he limited the portkey. It could only activate when Harry was on the verge of death, whisking him to one of Dylan's safe houses. He figured that even if people like Dung and the others found it, they wouldn't mention it. Sometimes guardians put portkeys on kids without the kids even knowing. "I'll keep it close." "Thanks, Dylan. You're the first person to actually give me a birthday present in person." Harry cradled the sapphire. Vernon peeked from behind the door, and Dylan caught his gaze. "There's one more thing." "I put a curse on it. A wizard's curse. If any ordinary muggle other than you tries to take the stone, the evil spirit trapped inside will devour their soul, leaving them an empty, motionless shell that only ages. The stone's protection relies on that spirit." "Huh?" Harry looked confused, then watched Dylan wink and glanced at Vernon. "He got it. You caught it in the graveyard behind the school, didn't you?" Dylan nodded. "My wand nearly broke." Harry looked truly touched. He had never expected Dylan to come to this house he hated and bring a present. "Ron tried to call 2 days ago," Harry said. "The call cut off. I thought I wouldn't be able to contact you guys all summer." "Where's your owl?" Dylan asked. Harry glanced at Vernon and pouted. "My uncle chases him off. I don't have many owls left that aren't afraid of him like at the start of term." Dylan couldn't help smiling. "We can't use magic here, but the ministry hasn't banned prank props." Harry's eyes lit up. "You mean?" Dylan produced a handful of items from his bag, a prank toy snake that lunged and pretended to bite, magical itching powder that made the victim scratch uncontrollably, a bat bogey hex spray to turn boogers into bats, a magical stink bomb that, when cracked, filled a room with a vile stench. He packed them into a smaller cloth pouch. Harry watched, slack-jawed. "This is a lot." "Keep this pouch on you," Dylan said, handing it over. "I put an undetectable extension charm on it. Even if you can't use magic, don't let anyone bully you." Harry looked at him, emotion flickering. Dylan mock pouted. "What, are you going to cry? I don't comfort boys, not even my friends." Harry's moment of moved silence vanished with Dylan's joke. "Thanks, Dylan." "Humph. Present delivered. I'm off. Don't make me come back and blast your rude, ill-mannered uncle into dust." Vernon shivered in anger and fear. Who was this man, and what company had Harry been keeping? No wonder Harry felt braver lately. He must have powerful friends. He wanted to rush out and teach Dylan a lesson, but Dylan's cool stare made him flinch. "Call Ron and the others directly when you can," Dylan added. "You don't have to wait for them to call you." Harry nodded reluctantly. He had finally seen his friend on his birthday, but they had to part so quickly. This wasn't Harry's home. He couldn't invite Dylan in, and Dylan didn't want to risk the ministry noticing any magic near Harry. Dylan had almost cast a wandless jinx on Vernon before Harry appeared. The minor accident it would have caused would have been harmless enough if he'd been careful. Generally, the ministry didn't always catch underage magic if no witnesses were around. Young Tom Riddle, for example, had once knocked out Morphin Gaunt and later killed his father in Little Hangleton with no immediate ministry response because no wizard was there to observe it. But any magical fluctuation around Harry was likely to be instantly detected. The ministry monitored Harry closely, both to protect him and to keep an eye on him. Dylan remembered how, last summer, Harry had been warned by the improper use of Magic Office, even when the spell in question had been cast by a house elf and not Harry himself. If Dylan did anything blatant now, Harry would almost surely be the one to get in trouble, so he stuck to prank props and left. Dylan walked a few steps away as Harry closed the door. Voices and scolding rose again inside, followed by a clang. Dylan smirked. He'd packed enough tricks into the pouch to keep Harry entertained all summer if his uncle kept up his behavior. Back home, Dylan resumed his studies and research and prodded his father to keep earning so he could spend more. One early morning in August, after a routine breakfast and about to call his parents up from their late-night outing, he heard the flap of wings at the window. An owl had come. Daily Prophet, he guessed, feeding the owl 5 nuts into its chest pouch and tossing it a piece of egg. The owl swallowed it happily, hooted twice, and flew off. The headline made him blink. Dangerous criminal escapes, extremely dangerous. The wizarding world may be in peril again. Dylan snorted. Finally escaped? The headline was over the top. Could one escapee really threaten the whole wizarding world? He scanned the large photo under the headline. The man in the picture had a gaunt-like face, skin like dried parchment, hair wild and unkempt, and eyes sunken deep and burning with madness. The expression seemed to push through the paper, as if the man were staring straight at him. "This photo makes him look alive," Dylan muttered. Whoever took it had captured the man's madness perfectly. When he'd resumed buying the Daily Prophet, Dylan had also seen a wanted poster for Karthus. Fierce, ruthless, a merciless executioner. If Karthus weren't Karthus, he'd be intimidated by the man in this photograph, a fellow they called Fool. Chapter 172, School Starts Again. Ron, is it really okay for you to say that about your mom? Nocturne Alley was gray and narrow, light slipping through the gaps between crooked buildings. A faint, sour smell hung in the air. Not far off, the black sign of Borgin and Burke's swung between 2 narrow, scratched windows. The thick wooden board had once been painted black. Now the paint had faded to a dull, lifeless wash, the grain of the wood showing through. The gilded letters spelling Borgin and Burke sat crookedly, their gold leaf peeled and dulled. Under the gaze of so many avaricious, malevolent customers, the sign seemed as worn and faded as the people who passed beneath it. Inside the shop, it was cold and damp, the air heavy with rot. Shelves displayed objects steeped in the dark arts, each looking more dangerous than the last. A man hunched at the counter, combing his greasy hair with one hand, while the other fingered a ruby-set ring. He muttered to himself. A shadow fell across the doorway. Mr. Borgin startled, his hand trembling and the ring clattering to the counter. He took a step back about to speak, and then recognized the newcomer. You've come. Dylan stood before him. He had added height with insoles. He now looked almost 6'2". Borgin's expression slid from alarm into obsequiousness. Look, arriving without so much as a message. I could have come to meet you. Come to meet me? The cold voice behind the mask was flat. Do you want to meet me in hell? Borgin flinched and tried to laugh it off. Now. Dylan wasted no time. Where are the things Delphini prepared? His tone was low and stripped of warmth. Borgin snapped to attention and hurried to rummage beneath the counter. Here. He coughed as dust rose and fished out a small briefcase. Funny coincidence. You left, then not long after Delphini appeared. I delivered your instructions and she brought everything the next day. He shoved the briefcase forward. All the galleons. See? It's all here. Dylan bent his head and examined the case. An undetectable extension charm buzzed faintly. There were no other obvious enchantments. He let the tip of his wand slide from under his sleeve and, with a light tap, the briefcase vanished from the counter as if swallowed. Good. And my share? Borgin's grin froze. He hesitated, fingers probing the shadowed depths under the counter, then came up with a worn money pouch. The acromantula venom. The buyers have been few, but it's all here, not a single nut short. His voice quavered. He kept his tone steady for fear the man before him might point a wand and use the killing curse. Dylan weighed the pouch briefly in his hand, then stuffed it into his pocket. Very good. You're my only contact. From now on, anything I need, I will come to you. Borgin wore a lamenting expression. Please, no. He rushed on. Miss Delphini has asked constantly to contact you. Could you leave her a way to reach you? Dylan paused, then snorted. I'm researching the greatest magic. Only I will come to you. Understood? Beneath his sleeve, the hidden wand tip flared with a brilliant, holy light. Borgin's face drained of color. He'd seen that light before, from the man who'd once been in the shop. He'd watched it kill a group in an instant. Holy light used in concert with a killing curse. No explanation was needed. Borgin believed Dylan's claim to be studying some supreme spell. Whether it was truly great or truly evil hardly mattered. I understand, Borgin said, watching Dylan's reaction closely. The mask and hood hid every feature. He looked like an evil high priest. Borgin bowed his head. When she comes again, I'll tell her it's because she hasn't offered enough. If she wants to see you, she must bring more galleons. Dylan snorted, satisfied, then pulsed into a sphere of holy light and shot out the door. He vanished as he left the shop. Borgin staggered back, staring after him. What kind of magic is that? It felt familiar and yet strange. Time moved on. It was almost time for school to start again. Dylan stood at platform 9 3/4. The scarlet bulk of the Hogwarts Express sat waiting, steam curling. Young witches and wizards flowed in and out of the carriages. A few couldn't manage all their luggage in one go. He stepped forward to climb aboard when a familiar commotion drifted from nearby. He turned and saw the Weasleys. Molly, he called and waved. Molly Weasley hustled Ron forward from the back of the group. Oh, Dylan, long time. How was your summer? Very good, ma'am. Very uneventful, Dylan replied with a polite tilt of the head. He had, in fact, kept his other identity out of sight this summer. He'd only been to Nocturne Alley twice, enough to collect a comfortable sum from Borgin and a far larger offering from Delphini. She'd never met him, yet had already sent a sizable fortune. It was simpler than going out to menace black wizards. It preserved his dignity. Molly smiled at Dylan. You've gotten lovelier. Did you have a bit of pampering? She looked shy and pleased, touching her hair. Ron, who had been dragged forward, caught that smile and stared open-mouthed. He blinked at Dylan, then at his mother. How did Dylan make everyone smile like that? When had Mom ever looked like that before? It was too much. Ron's expression was a picture, equal parts jealous and confused, but neither Dylan nor Molly seemed to notice. Dylan greeted Ginny. She blushed and stepped aside. Ron's annoyance grew. All summer he'd been trying to get Ginny to call him Big Brother like she called Dylan. She'd refused. He hadn't even wanted to play with Fred and George anymore. Molly chatted amiably about the summer and, without missing a beat, dropped into the kinds of motherly anecdotes that made Ron flush. Oh, Ron, you still wet the bed at your age. Gave me quite a bit of work, she said with a laugh. Ron wanted to protest. He was sure it had been one of Fred and George's pranks, but no one listened. Ginny covered her mouth and giggled. Fred and George whistled to the sky. Molly changed tack and asked Dylan about his plans for the new year. He answered with easy charm. Then she brightened. By the way, have you seen Harry? No, Dylan said. I just arrived. I don't think he's here yet. Shall we wait for him here a little while? Molly asked her family. Ginny shook her head. Percy said it was still early, so waiting was fine. The twins fell silent. I'll go find a seat on the train, Dylan said politely. I want to read for a bit. Of course, child, go ahead, Molly said. Dylan boarded the train. Molly turned and jabbed a warning glare at Ron and the twins. Dylan's so diligent. If even one of you were like him, I'd light a candle and pray. Ron pouted. Mom, I want to read too. I'll find Dylan and come down later. Without waiting, he darted into the carriage and ran after Dylan. Dylan heard him huffing up close. For a moment, he worried something was wrong, but Ron was only in full complaint mode. You have no idea how awful my summer was, Dylan. He plunged on without waiting for a response. Ever since Lockhart disappeared, Mums heard the stories about what he did at school, She's been going on about it like she wants to divorce Dad. Dylan glanced out the window. Molly was still chatting. Arthur wasn't there. He must be occupied elsewhere. Dylan looked back. Sometimes Ron deserved a smack. It was boring at home. Mum kept lecturing me, telling me to learn lots of magic during the summer. Why would I need all those spells? There won't be another Chamber of Secrets for me to solve every year. Dad did win a prize in the middle of it, though, 1,000 galleons. We even went to Egypt, but it was filthy. Ron kept up his running commentary as they walked along the platform between already full carriages. I called Harry loads before we left, but his uncle was dreadful, hung up on me. Terrible. Dylan only made a sound. Ron rattled on. I wrote him letters, but then I heard Harry use the prank stuff you gave him on the Dursleys. Gave them a lesson. Heavens, Ron said admiringly. Why didn't I think to give Harry prank items first? Fred and George still have loads. Dylan clicked his tongue. Maybe the phone line was cut. He remembered one of the items he'd given Harry, a pair of extremely sharp harvest scissors, perfect for dreadful housekeeping. Despite the name Vernon, he's not the sort to help farmers. Dylan pushed open a carriage door. It was full, smiled an apology, and closed it again. Ron chuckled. When I was in Diagon Alley buying books, I ran into Hermione and Harry. Harry said he'd never felt so respected in front of his uncle's family, all thanks to you. Dylan opened another carriage door. Inside were Neville and Seamus. Seems Harry put your things to good use, he said lightly. Come in, Seamus grinned. We saw you and Ron through the window. Neville waved. Ron hesitated when he spotted Harry on the platform, then said, I'll go say goodbye to Mum first. Go on. Dylan waved him off and sat down opposite Neville and Seamus. He put a book aside on a seat to read later and reached into his bag, a pocket enlarged with an undetectable extension charm, for some fruit he'd grown in his little space. It wasn't quite natural. He'd had Lockhart, under Imperius, tending them. Still, they were his. Try these, Windsor currants and Cornish black plums. I grew them myself. Neville and Seamus brightened and bitten eagerly. So sweet. You really grew these yourself? Neville asked, savoring a plum. They're the first ones to ripen, Dylan said. I brought them to share. Seamus grinned. You must have used magic fertilizer to make them ripen so fast. Bingo, Dylan said, and handed another plum over as a reward. He glanced at the carriage, noticing no third roommate. Where's Dean? He not here? Seamus shook his head. Not yet. Probably another carriage or not arrived. We'll meet at Hogwarts. Dylan nodded. If Dean were here, I would have let him try these too. Seamus grabbed another handful. When the train starts, I'll look for him. Dylan nodded, smiling. It wasn't long before 11. Through the window, Dylan watched Ron and Harry meet on the platform and chat. Hermione arrived, and all three glanced toward them. Dylan waved. Ron mouthed, We'll find an empty carriage later. Dylan nodded. The Weasleys boarded. Dylan waved goodbye to Molly. Seamus rose to hunt for Dean. The train sighed and started. Dylan something wandlessly summoned water to wash his hands and let a small breeze dry them. Small comforts shone lightly, as if he did them every day. Neville, used to Dylan's wandless tricks, watched casually. Dylan picked up the book he'd set aside, a copy of the Monster Book of Monsters, lying quiet in his hand. Neville's eyes widened. Hey, how did you make it quiet? When it jumped out of a trunk and chased someone on the platform before, it bit him. Dylan chuckled. It's just transfiguration enchantments. Unmake them if you like, or stroke its spine. Calms it down. It's not that complicated. Neville blinked, absorbing the explanation. It's like a chocolate frog, then? Clever, Dylan replied. Neville changed the subject. I heard Professor Kettleburn is retiring, the care of magical creatures professor. Who'll take over? Dylan shrugged. Headmaster Dumbledore will manage, and you only signed up for divination anyway, right? Neville nodded. Yes. I'm glad I listened to you and didn't take more classes. At home, I talked it over with Gran, and she agreed with your advice. That's good, Dylan said. Chapter 173. You're Dementors. Don't go around me. I can't catch you. The sphinxes in Egypt are large, thick-skinned, and unusually intelligent, the sort of large creature that would be perfectly suited to cultivating obsidian flowers. Dylan turned the page slowly, absorbing the text. Outside the window, the Hogwarts Express sped through a sky that was turning leaden. The afternoon slid into gloom. The warmth in the carriage bled away. It was around 2 or 3 o'clock. Fine rain began to streak the glass, pattering against the window in ever-growing, noisy clumps. Dylan remained calm, reading. Hogwarts isn't going to be wet, is it? I hate rainy days, Neville muttered, frowning. Neville hadn't been as patient as Dylan. He'd finished the lunch his gran had packed and was now stowing away the empty lunchbox. Students who left late in the morning usually ate on the train, finishing lunch around 1 or 2. Just the right time so as not to spoil dinner. Neville puckered his lips. This gloomy weather gives me the creeps. Dylan paused, idly pinching a page between his fingers before turning it. He looked up at Neville and arched an eyebrow. Your choice to take divination is a good one. Professor Trelawney has more to teach than people give her credit for, though divination depends on one's talent. He smiled faintly. I think you have talent. Neville's face brightened, disbelief and hope mixing together. My talent, you mean? Dylan nodded. I have a feeling Hogwarts will run into odd things this year. Neville went pale. Good heavens, is there going to be another Chamber of Secrets? Dylan shook his head. Not that far. Why would Slytherin have multiple chambers? Still, Neville began, then trailed off. He wanted to press for details, to ask what Dylan had meant, but Dylan had stopped halfway through a sentence. Neville's imagination filled in the rest with all sorts of anxious possibilities. He wanted to say more, to learn divination, so he wouldn't need to ask Dylan everything. But before he could decide, the train began to slow. It creaked and sighed as it came to a halt. Neville stared out the rain-blurred window, heart thudding. The fields outside were indistinct, the mountains distant smudges. A chill crawled up from his feet. Dylan, I feel like something's outside. Dylan finally closed his book and set it aside. He stayed silent as Neville scrambled up and crowded close and without fuss made room for him. Compared to Neville's panic, Dylan was oddly calm, even a little thrilled. At last, they're here. On the outside of the carriage glass, a wet, black handprint smeared across. A scraping sound followed. The sliding door was being opened from the outside. Die. Don't be afraid. Stay quiet. Dylan tapped his wand and threw up wards so fast that Neville felt himself suddenly boxed in by suits of armor that afforded protection but also muffled sight and sound. Dylan's eyes never left the door. Excitement glittered in them. The carriage door opened. A massive figure loomed in the gap, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. It was wrapped in a pitch-black, sodden cloak that hung like a ragged, rotting thing, where its skin showed it looked pallid, scarred, slick with viscous filth. It was worse than any movie version. Dylan clicked his tongue, studying the creature. In this world, such entities were called non-beings, things born of human emotions, not truly alive or dead. Dense, dangerous, they fed on feelings. Dementors were the most feared of them. Born from despair and fear, they fed on happiness and could suck the soul from a person with a cruel thing called the kiss. Most wizards loathed them. To the rest of the carriage, a Dementor was only horror. To Dylan, who thought like a scientist and a collector, it was an irresistible subject for study. The thing drifted in and oddly, almost politely, shut the door behind it. Dylan's smile deepened, colder than before. The Dementor found Dylan's smile fascinating. It moved in as if expecting a feast of happy memories. Instead, a thick black mist poured from Dylan, coiling and writhing through the carriage like hungry tentacles. Within the smoke, pale, ghostly eyes seemed to blink into existence, a vision of endless depths that would unmake the mind. The Dementor, used to drawing forth only fear and despair, stiffened as the mist rolled toward it. This human's darkness was different. The thing, which had always been the predator, felt a tremor it had never felt before. It wanted to withdraw, but Dylan didn't let it. Come in, my dear. He snapped his fingers. A battered suitcase appeared at his feet. Its lid creaked open to avoid black as a Dementor's mouth. The black mist swelled and poured into the case. Eyes glowed within that darkness, cold and unblinking, and the Dementor found itself rooted as if nailed to the floor. Panic rattled through it as frenzied, greedy darkness surrounded it, tightening like a noose. The Dementor beat its cloak, shrieking, and for the first time, it felt fear. Dylan raised his wand, and a light flared at the tip, an eerie, almost holy gleam. Expulso! A burst of white light detonated with a roar, cutting through the dark and throwing out ripples of unnatural chill. The Dementor's cloak flailed as if falling into an abyss. The black mist entangled it, Unblinking eyes fixed on its hollow, the creature screamed, contorted, tried to flee, and could not. The darkness that Dylan commanded overawed it. Bit by bit, the Dementor was forced into the suitcase until the lid slammed down with a final, reverberating bang, and the shriek was cut off. Dylan sealed the case with another of his peculiar wards, Evil Eye Cthulhu, folding its power around the creature. That way it couldn't wander the suitcase's space and roam free inside his pockets of containment. He had no intention of letting it terrorize his coal ball or his little dragon. If it frightened them, Dylan promised himself he'd return the favor in kind. Silence settled back over the compartment. The black fog faded. Dylan undid the layers of protection he'd put up, the armor wards, the silencing charm, the ear blocks, and Neville's senses snapped back. But clarity did not calm him. If anything, the fear sharpened. His legs trembled so violently his teeth chattered. What was that? That black hand? Dylan offered a small smile. Don't worry, that was a Dementor. Neville shivered so hard the cold seemed to seep into his bones. Dylan saw the color had drained from his face completely, leaving him as pale as another boy he knew. Without missing a beat, Dylan popped a chocolate into Neville's mouth. Suck on it? Sugar and sweetness eased Neville's panic, the toast of memory dispelling some of the frost. He clutched the candy with shaky fingers. How did Dementors get here? This is the Hogwarts Express? They're supposed to be in Azkaban, aren't they? Are they here to take us away? Dylan stared through the rain-streaked window, thinking. There were a lot of Dementors tonight. 10, perhaps 20, certainly not just 1 or 2. It occurred to him that catching a few more would be useful. He kept his voice casual. Didn't you read the Prophet? Over the summer, there was a report. Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban. Neville jumped. What? You said we might meet strange things this term, Neville said, breathless. Could this be why? Maybe. Dylan shrugged. I only said I had a feeling. Fate doesn't hand me a script. He stood up. Neville's panic flared anew. Where are you going? I'll check on Harry and the others, Dylan said. You stay put. A Dementor already inspected our compartment. As long as you don't leave, you'll be fine. An eye, wrapped in a wisp of black mist, peered up through a crack beneath the seats and glowered at Neville. He hugged himself, nearly in tears. I feel like someone's watching me. It's all right. Don't be afraid. Trust me, Dylan said, offering 3 reassurance charms at once. Neville wanted desperately to go with him, but the thought of the carriage corridors outside, of more Dementors, froze him in place. You have to come back quick, Dylan. Please. Of course I will. Dylan opened the compartment door and stepped out. Neville curled into a ball on the seat, pulling his feet up as if to keep them safe, staring at the closing seam where the door met the frame. Oh, Merlin's socks, Dylan. Hurry back, he whimpered. Down the dim corridor Dylan walked, the suitcase tucked under his arm. Dementors drifted through the train like living shadows, sliding between compartments and pushing cold into every corner. Wizards inside trembled. A few Dementors detected Dylan and drifted toward him, robes flapping, the air around them freezing. Dylan let them gather. For a moment their blackness wrapped him. Then, as if remembering something unpleasant, the surrounding Dementors scattered, panicking and clumsy in their retreat. 1 or 2 fewer stayed than before. Dylan had netted them. He moved to the end of the train, taking a few more when they made the mistake of approaching too closely. But something annoyed him. The remaining Dementors had learned. Instead of confronting him, they were skirting around him, slipping past on either side as if too frightened to face him head-on. Dylan's expression soured into comic anger. You're Dementors. How can you go around me? Come on, surround me. Just like before. All of you, come at me, otherwise I won't be satisfied. Chapter 174. I hope the Dementors are more durable. Ah, these Dementors really don't like being scared off. Dylan stood in the carriage corridor. The Dementors had already drifted away. None of them seemed to notice that one of their number was missing. They simply refused, instinctively, to approach this particular young wizard. By the time the corridor was empty, Dylan had captured 7 Dementors. That was a decent haul. Just enough. Dementors aren't like those goblins, where 1 less equals extinction, right? He muttered. He remembered how he'd pushed the goblins' population as far as he could. Aphrodisiacs, every kind of breeding charm he could find, even some darker rituals. He'd barely kept them from disappearing in his pocket space. The goblins had started off sickly. After his forced breeding attempts, they'd developed dark circles under their eyes and were all painfully weak. He'd even tried to get a male and a female to pair up. Both of them had tried to hide from him, the male covering the front, the female the back, desperate to get away. Dylan had been at his wit's end until the basilisk came along and his appetite for goblin flesh and blood eased. "What was that just now?" sobbed someone from inside a carriage. The sound reached Dylan in the corridor and made him shake his head. The Dementors had left a deep impression on the students. Even when they didn't attack physically, their presence drained joy and pressed down on people's emotions. They could secretly steal happy memories, the way they'd tried to do to Dylan. He couldn't cast a cheering charm on every passenger, but by patrolling the train, he'd captured some Dementors and prevented others from secretly feeding. Most of the students in the carriages would be all right. He was heading back to his own compartment when the sliding door of the next carriage opened and two identical heads poked out. "Dylan? What are you doing here?" the Weasley twins asked in unison, surprised. "Haven't you ever taken a walk?" Dylan blinked. "I just went for a stroll." The twins stared for a beat. "You're very relaxed," one of them said. "Never mind, have you seen Ginny?" Fred asked. "No, I haven't," Dylan said. "Did you leave her in the carriage and run off again?" "She wanted to go for a walk." "She probably came looking for you," George added. "We're going to find her now." They didn't wait for an answer and dashed out, searching carriage by carriage. Dylan watched their busy backs for a moment, shrugged, and returned to his own compartment. Neville looked startled at first, then relieved to see him. "Dylan, you're back," Neville said. Dylan smiled, closed the carriage door, and sat down beside him. "No more Dementors should be coming, right?" "Yes, yes," Neville nodded eagerly. "It felt like something was watching me. When Dementors floated past outside, it was like they wanted to come in, but when they got near, they drifted off to the other side. They probably saw you were the only one there and decided not to bother searching," Dylan said with a small laugh. "That must be it," Neville agreed. With the Dementors gone, the Hogwarts Express continued without further interruption and finally reached its destination. Neville and Seamus gathered their things. Dylan carried only a small bag and led the two of them off the train. He didn't bother looking for the twins. They'd surely found Ginny by now. The air outside was damp and sharp. A rain had swept away the last of summer and left a chill that hinted at autumn. The presence of the Dementors seemed to have frozen the atmosphere, making the cold bite deeper. "Thermo Enchantia," Dylan murmured, and a warm glow spread over him. He cast the same charm on Seamus and Neville. The warmth pushed back the chill and easing the pallor from Neville's face. Seamus breathed more easily and rubbed his hands together. Dylan flicked his wand again, and a gentle field of magic gathered above them, causing the finer drops of rain to part. A levitation-style charm kept the worst of the drizzle from soaking them. "Right," Dylan said. "Hurry back to school. Don't dawdle." The students climbed into the horseless carriages and rode toward Hogwarts. Dylan and Neville got out near the entrance to the Great Hall. From a distance, Professor McGonagall stood at the doorway as if waiting for someone. When she saw Dylan, she waved him over, and the moment he reached her, she pulled him aside. "Come with me for a moment," she said. Dylan nodded and told Neville, "You two go on in." Neville, who was more comfortable with Professor Sprout than with McGonagall, nodded quickly and hurried into the hall with Seamus. After a short wait, Harry and Hermione arrived. Ron wasn't with them. McGonagall didn't seem to intend to include him. She led the three of them toward the deputy head's office. They passed through the familiar corridor and reached McGonagall's office. She touched the portrait door with her wand, and it opened. The office smelled of old books, and the light was warm and steady. Dylan's eyes were immediately drawn to something different on the walls. Among the usual animated portraits and tapestries, there was an extra piece, a painted bust of McGonagall that, unlike most moving portraits, didn't animate. It had a lively expression but remained still, an oddly solemn presence. McGonagall saw Dylan looking and smiled faintly. "You met Professor Lupin on the train, didn't you? His owl flew ahead to say you encountered some trouble that left you uncomfortable." Dylan thought for a moment. If McGonagall was calling them in only to discuss that, why had she asked for him as well as Harry? He hadn't even seen Professor Lupin. He'd only walked part of the train and hadn't run into Lupin at all. It was unlikely Lupin had been watching him. Still, he kept silent and hung back. Knock, knock. At that moment, someone knocked on the office door. McGonagall flicked her wand and it opened. Madame Pomfrey stepped in briskly. Harry answered with a little smile. I don't think there's anything wrong. Madame Pomfrey studied Harry's face, brows knitting, then glanced at Dylan and Hermione. What dangerous thing have you lot been up to now? You look like you've had a nasty fright. She looked them over more closely. Strange, two of you look like that. What have you been getting into? Dylan inwardly rolled his eyes at the instant stereotype. Harry hesitated to answer, but McGonagall spoke gravely. Poppy, it wasn't something they did. It was Dementors. Those creatures again. Madame Pomfrey's face tightened into displeasure. How could they be sending Dementors near the school? I can't believe it. She poked at Harry's temples. You'll feel better after a while, she muttered as she worked. How many students might be affected by those things? Goodness, you're so cold and clammy. Were you near them? How annoying. Don't they know about propriety and personal space? She added. Alas, they do worse damage to those who are already fragile. As she fussed with Harry, she glanced over the others and kept up a steady stream of worried commentary. Harry protested. Madam, I'm not delicate. I'm not fragile. Of course not, of course, she said, but she kept kneading Harry's shoulders and then, gently but firmly, clasped the back of his head and began to massage. No wonder Professor McGonagall called me. Don't worry, he'll be fine. These two just need rest. Madame Pomfrey squatted and looked up at McGonagall. The deputy head's features softened. Just a quiet rest? Yes, he's frightened. Children are fragile. Let him stay in the infirmary tonight. Madame Pomfrey added, looking at Dylan. This one seems stronger than the other. I'm not fragile, Harry protested again, but his voice had the edge of someone still unnerved. The memory images Dementors brought, parents dying by Voldemort's curse, had hit him hard. That raw, intrusive vision made him feel like a child powerless in the face of something monstrous. He didn't want to be treated as helpless, but he couldn't deny the effect. Dylan, watching Harry's embarrassment, pulled another candy from his pocket, the same kind he'd given Neville. Have a strawberry one, he offered. It helps. Harry picked it up, glanced at Dylan, and admitted, thanks. He unwrapped it and popped it in his mouth. His face brightened. Hermione, here. This is probably blueberry. Dylan handed Hermione one as well. Thanks, she said, taking it. Professor Lupin gave us chocolate on the train. Madame Pomfrey smiled, satisfied. I never thought Dumbledore would find a defense against the dark arts professor with real substance, someone reliable at last. McGonagall nodded. I'd hoped we'd avoid trouble this year. But, Madame Pomfrey sighed, the trouble's already started. She stood and looked once more at Harry, sucking the candy, and at Hermione fiddling with the wrapper. I judge that neither of you has any serious physical harm, just the effects of the Dementors being near. Any other symptoms? Both Harry and Hermione shook their heads. Madame Pomfrey glanced at Dylan. His complexion was rosy, and he seemed calm. She blinked. You say you encountered Dementors on the train? I did, Dylan said. Then why are you? She began. That one only glanced at Neville and me and drifted off. It didn't come close, Dylan explained. Madame Pomfrey nodded. Good. In that case, there's nothing more for me to do here. McGonagall's mouth curved faintly. Thank you for your help, Poppy. Take Harry and sit in the infirmary for a bit. Miss Granger, Dylan and I will discuss some course matters. We'll be out shortly. Madame Pomfrey took Harry's hand and led him out. The door closed behind them, and McGonagall turned back to the two students left standing. Starting in third year, you have elective courses, she said. I know the subjects you want to take have some overlaps, which will create timetable conflicts. You're aware of that, yes? Dylan nodded. Hermione looked anxious. She wasn't sure whether McGonagall meant she planned to grant a time turner to Dylan or to cancel some of Hermione's classes. Given the situation, McGonagall continued, I have helped file for something that will allow you to complete your courses. But, Chapter 175, Time Converter. Professor McGonagall's eyes moved between Dylan and Hermione. This device is extremely precious and very difficult to obtain. Only truly exceptional students may use them. Her tone was grave, more severe than in class. I know you two are excellent and therefore qualified to use them to make up overlapping classes, but you must keep this completely secret. You may not tell anyone, no one, not even Dumbledore. Hermione blinked. Professor, what do we have to do? Swear to me, with an unbreakable vow. Promise me you will not reveal this item. McGonagall watched them both intently. An unbreakable vow. Hermione looked surprised. It's necessary. If this device is discovered while you have it, there could be serious consequences. People might target you. I must be cautious. She softened a fraction. Once you finish the courses, it will most likely stop working, and then you won't have to keep the secret. Under McGonagall's guidance, Dylan and Hermione swore one after the other. Only after she had confirmed the vow was unbreakable did McGonagall nod, lean forward, and pull open a drawer. She rummaged for a moment and produced a small, ornate box. It had an antique sheen and a deep brown finish. She set it on the desk and opened it. Inside lay 2 necklaces. Dylan leaned in. The chains looked like pure gold, glinting softly. The pendants were hourglasses of an odd shape. Inside, golden sand flowed slowly. The hourglass was encircled by 2 concentric golden rings, each ring carved with intricate runes. This is, Hermione whispered. A time turner, McGonagall said, every syllable heavy. It can send you back in time to attend classes with conflicting schedules. Hermione's eyes went wide. She covered her mouth quickly. A sound might have carried to Harry and Madame Pomfrey waiting outside. McGonagall's face remained stern. She did not hand them the time turners yet. The time turner can take you back, she continued. Remember, you may only use it to attend classes you are enrolled in. She fixed them with a hard look. I require another promise. You must not use it to change the past and cause irreversible consequences. Time travel is not safe. It is dangerous. Casual changes to the past can unmake reality and the future, causing catastrophic results. The time turner's existence is for academic purposes only. That is an ironclad rule under the Ministry of Magic. Violators face the harshest punishments. She repeated the warnings. Dylan and Hermione nodded again and again. Dylan listened carefully. McGonagall's insistence that they not cause irreversible consequences suggested a narrow allowance, a little wiggle room. They were allowed to go back to attend classes, which by definition was changing when they were present, but McGonagall forbade altering the past in ways that would irreparably affect things. Dylan had no intention of rewriting history. He wanted to study the time turner, see if it could unlock anything, maybe an achievement, maybe something more powerful. He wanted to research it, not recklessly tamper with time. Once they swore again, McGonagall took the necklaces from the box and placed one in each of their hands. Dylan held his carefully. The 2 rings around the hourglass bore an inscription. I mark the hours, everyone, but have never outrun the sun. My use and value to you are measured by what you have to do. He felt an odd, pulsing magic within the time turner, something he couldn't fully comprehend. I'll say it again, McGonagall said, solemn. This particular time turner can only take you back a maximum of 5 hours. Each full turn of the hourglass sends you back 1 hour. You must not turn it more than that. Dylan shifted the chain. The golden sand inside rippled as if alive. And when you use it, be sure no one notices. If the timeline becomes chaotic, the results will be dire. Time accidents, magical disasters, and you could suffer irreversible harm, possibly disappearing from time entirely. Completely disappear. Her warning hung in the office. Hermione, who had been fiddling with her own time turner, went solemn. Remember, time is a fragile weave. Do not leap upon it. We understand, Professor, they said. They both copied down McGonagall's key points in their notebooks before she released them. The small group, McGonagall, Dylan, Hermione, Harry, and Madame Pomfrey, left the office and hurried toward the Great Hall. McGonagall's long strides practically dragged the others along. By the time they arrived, the sorting ceremony was over. Professor Snape had presided. Dylan looked at the first years. They all seemed rattled by Snape, tense and pale. The Slytherin first years were no better off. They had also felt the sting of Snape's barbed tongue. Dylan walked back to his table. Snape, returning from the ceremony, glanced over. Dylan smiled at him amiably. Snape barely lifted his chin, turned away with a sweep of black robes, and offered a cold look to the person beside him before looking elsewhere. Dylan grinned and muttered under his breath, "Old Sundare." The great hall glittered, candles floating under the vaulted ceiling, and long tables laden with food. Dylan's hand absently stroked the time turner hidden beneath his robes, the hourglass's edges pressed through the fabric. Hermione was quietly explaining their course selection to Harry. Every time she glanced at Dylan, she instinctively touched her collar. "You two have been odd since you came back from the hospital wing," Ron said, poking his empty plate. "Professor McGonagall didn't make you sign some devil's contract, did she? Like forcing you to study non-stop?" "Just the usual course selection guidelines," Dylan said, grinning. "Like memorizing 12 pages of advanced transfiguration safety regulations." Hermione pursed her lips. Dumbledore rose slowly, robes whispering. He raised then lowered his hand, and the hall fell silent. His gaze swept over the students with a warm smile. "Welcome back to Hogwarts," he boomed. "The sorting ceremony is complete. Welcome, new students. Before dinner, a few announcements." He cleared his throat. His smile wavered. "You have probably already seen them on the Hogwarts Express. Dementors from Azkaban. They have been sent by the Ministry and will remain at the school until Sirius Black is captured. Until then, they will guard our entrances." The expression on Dumbledore's face tightened. He was not pleased. Dylan understood why he felt justified in taking action on the train. If someone noticed a few fewer Dementors, would the Minister dare to question Dumbledore? Dumbledore would simply reply that the Ministry had sent the Dementors to perform official duties. What more could they expect? Dumbledore continued, his voice steady and grave. "Although the Ministry insists they will not disrupt our routines, I must warn you, while Dementors are present, no one may leave school without permission. They will not respond to excuses or pleas. They cannot distinguish an intended victim from anyone in their path. No disguise or trick, no invisibility cloak will deceive them. So don't give them reason to harm you. Dementors are born without mercy." He paused. "Prefects and the new head boy and head girl, do everything you can to prevent any student from coming to harm." Dylan popped a piece of chestnut cake into his mouth, listening to the warnings without much concern. An invisibility cloak might fail to fool the Dementors, but his shadow ring might hide him. If that didn't work, his animagus form could put them off. He sighed quietly at the thought. He still hoped the system would reward him with a second animagus form sometime, but nothing had happened yet. "Hey, Dylan, where'd you get that chestnut cake?" Ron demanded, eyes wide. Dylan swallowed and put a finger to his lips. "I brought it. Don't worry, you'll eat soon enough." Dumbledore brightened. "I am pleased to announce 2 new professors this year. At my invitation, Professor Remus Lupin will teach defense against the dark arts." Lupin, seated near Snape, stood and nodded. Applause rippled through the hall, polite, thin, mostly from first years. Snape's face stayed tightly controlled. He clapped once, twice, another forced clap, and then dropped his hands. Dylan noticed the barely concealed disdain in Snape's expression. "Our care of magical creatures professor has retired. Rubus Hagrid has graciously agreed to take the position in addition to his duties guarding the Forbidden Forest." Hagrid, sitting at the table, turned crimson as applause swelled, louder this time, especially from Gryffindors. He beamed, awkwardly scratching his head and making his hair fluffier. His grin was simple and shy. "All right, enjoy the feast," Dumbledore announced. The hall erupted into motion. Goblets refilled, platters appeared. Dylan ate like a hurricane until he was stuffed. He raised his wand and muttered, "Digero Cebus," and the heavy feeling eased. He didn't want to eat it all at once. He'd be hungry again soon enough. After the meal, the students drifted toward the exits and the common rooms. Hermione leaned toward Dylan. "Did you feel it? The sand in the hourglass, it's like it's alive." He had felt it when McGonagall handed it over. The golden sand floated against gravity and sometimes formed shifting runes. "Don't stare at it all the time," Dylan said quietly. McGonagall warned about the observer effect. Observing it can sometimes make small probabilities happen. You might create cracks in time. Hermione nodded. "I'll be careful." They threaded through the crowd, but a senior in Slytherin robes stepped in front of them. He spoke evenly, not with Malfoy's sneer. Professor Snape asked me to tell you he's in his office and wants to see you as soon as possible. Dylan raised an eyebrow. He had no classes that required being summoned on the first day. The student had already turned away. The professor's looking for you, Hermione said. Go on. I'll head back to the common room. Classes start tomorrow. Get some rest. Dylan nodded and went toward the dungeons. The air grew cooler. Torches threw wavering light on damp stone. Droplets shimmered in the glow, and a faint scent of potion ingredients lingered. He stood before Snape's office. The door stood ajar. He knocked, then pushed it open. Snape sat behind his desk in a black robe, half shaded by the dimness. Even so, Dylan could see his severe face, as still and shadowed as the portraits lining the walls. Professor, you wanted to see me? Dylan asked. Snape lifted a hand. At the sight of Dylan, the harshness around his mouth softened just a fraction, though his overall expression remained cold. The hook of his nose threw a long shadow in the lamplight. The candlelight in the dungeon office threw flickering shadows across the stone walls. Glass jars full of indistinct creature parts glowed faintly on the shelves. Professor Snape's black robes swept over the mottled flagstones like the wings of some ominous bat. A high-backed oak chair, carved with writhing serpents, stood 3 paces from him. Sit. Dylan obeyed and dropped onto the leather cushion with a creak. Snape's voice, low and hollow as the dungeon itself, filled the room. This semester, one of the new professors will require wolfsbane, 1 bottle a month. Dylan blinked. Snape's expression was unreadable. His thin lips barely moved. I do not wish to brew his potion, not even at Dumbledore's request. So? Dylan prompted. Snape looked at him as if the question shouldn't need asking. He pursed his lips, his usual iciness settling back in. If you brew it, Dumbledore will owe you a favor as well. I will provide the ingredients. Any questions? Dylan stroked his chin. Snape was being unusually casual. Lupin was a werewolf. He needed wolfsbane to keep his mind during the full moon. That was obvious. What was less comfortable was that Snape had just announced it so plainly. Only 2 new professors that year, right? Hagrid and Lupin. That left little mystery. Snape must have promised Dumbledore to keep Lupin's condition confidential. Was it wise to let it slip like this? Dylan wiped a non-existent bead of sweat from his forehead. More important, wolfsbane was difficult to brew, with a low success rate and expensive, rare components. It was a relatively recent refinement in wizarding medicine, intended to temper a werewolf's transformation, to stave off the worst of the change, preserve sanity, dull pain, and prevent a complete loss of control. Dylan had never learned to make it from Snape. If Snape trusted him enough to hand this task over, the ingredients would be precious indeed. An idea tickled at the back of his mind. Pretend to fail once or twice, pocket a batch of ingredients, then use the next batch to brew a single perfect bottle to hand over. Make a tidy profit as middleman. He stifled the grin that threatened to show. I'd be very glad to help you, Professor, he said, eyes sincere. I'm just worried that if I fail, the ingredients will be wasted, and I'd be very embarrassed. Snape raised an eyebrow. After a pause, he said dryly, even if you fail, it can be handled. Dylan's mind supplied 100 impractical solutions. He nodded instead. All right, if you give me 2 or 3 portions of ingredients each month, I can guarantee 1 good bottle every month. Snape's eyes narrowed. I hope so. Dylan smiled sheepishly. By the way, Professor, why are you unwilling to brew this particular potion yourself? Snape fixed him with a cold look. Dylan grinned back, unafraid. After a moment, Snape snorted. Does that need asking? Because I brewed other potions immediately before I discovered I needed to brew wolfsbane. Such as? Dylan fluttered his lashes. Snape's face darkened. Living death. Dylan's expression shifted to sudden understanding. He knew, from his own experiments, that certain potions left residual magical tones that could interfere with subsequent brewing. Magical properties like feminine or masculine qualities mattered. Polyjuice required fluxweed harvested under a full moon to harness a feminine aspect. Animagus preparations needed full moon and thunderstorm conditions to align metamorphic forces while avoiding masculine sunlight. Living Death was an extremely potent sleeping draught that drew on feminine power. Wolfsbane, which must counteract the venom and transformation of a werewolf, called for masculine qualities. If Snape had just brewed Living Death, attempting wolfsbane afterward could cause an imbalance or spoil the potion entirely. You didn't brew living death recently, did you? Dylan asked, puzzled. Whatever residual influence potions had, he discovered it faded fairly quickly, often dissipating completely within a few days. One bottle of wolfsbane was required monthly. Snape, the most dedicated of potion masters, surely could find the time. Dylan didn't believe Snape was incapable, but he hadn't pressed the issue. He liked being Snape's most prideful senior disciple in his own mind. He had to protect his master's interests, even if the title was self-bestowed. Then, when will you give me the ingredients and the recipe? Dylan asked. Snape tapped his wand, and a small pouch appeared. They're here. Take them. Study them. I don't expect perfection. Usable is sufficient. Understood? Dylan took the pouch without making a show of it. Of course. Brew it in your dormitory. Don't keep using the classrooms for your private experiments. Snape glanced up. Dylan held his smile. I understand, Professor. There was a pause. Snape looked at him again. Are you not going? Oh, right. Dylan played the part of the startled student, scrambled to his feet, and made an over-earnest exit. Good night, Professor. Get some rest. Snape watched him go, mouth twitching. Dylan followed the stairs back to Gryffindor Tower and gave the fat lady the password. The common room fire had burned low to dark embers. It was late. Dylan planned to start brewing that night, based on Snape's mood. He suspected Snape hadn't even prepared that month's bottle for Lupin. He opened the pouch. Inside was a small notebook detailing the recipe and the list of required components. Wolfsbane root, unicorn horn powder, belladonna essence, cranesbill, frankincense, poisonous mushroom, and more. It also called for a pure gold cauldron, a gold stirring rod, a silver cauldron and silver rod, fine gauze, parchment, the works. Dylan checked the quantities. There were 3 portions of the rare ingredients. His eyes lit up. 3 portions, he muttered. I'll use 1. That still leaves 2. He thought about taking a trip to the Forbidden Forest soon. Unicorn horn and blood were invaluable for research. And Hagrid, now a professor, would surely have access to creature supplies. Maybe he could persuade Hagrid to slip him something for study. He smiled at the possibilities, and at the thought that his elective-heavy schedule gave him only narrow windows to brew. Harry and Ron, chatting nearby, noticed his expression. Ron shivered. Why does Dylan's smile look so sinister? Harry glanced over. What's that booklet? Hermione said Snape called you just now. Dylan ignored them and began setting up a brewing station. Neville's curiosity got the better of him. Dylan, are you brewing a potion? Yes, Dylan said, already arranging bottles and cauldrons. Snape asked me to help brew wolfsbane, but with all my classes, I can only do it now. Ron gaped at the equipment. Is that a pure gold cauldron? Blimey, how much is that worth? Dylan grinned. I borrowed them from Mr. Borgin. Ron whistled. Merlin's socks. You're loaded. I'll be rich someday, Dylan said casually. He set a small table near the door, cast a silencing charm to muffle sound, and lit the fire. Then he began the long, fiddly work. He put on gloves and chopped the wolfsbane roots into small pieces, combining them with unicorn horn powder. Belladonna essence would need to steep with the wolfsbane for a whole bowl's worth of time. In the gold-cold cauldron, Dylan added distilled water and the cranesbill. That brew had to simmer for at least 4 hours to draw a strong essence. In the silver cauldron, he placed frankincense and stirred 5 times clockwise and 3 times counterclockwise with the silver rod before lighting the fire. He cast a protective ward around the setup to prevent accidental burns and to stop curious passers-by. He laid out bottles and jars. Not all were needed that night, but he planned to brew more often in the dorm, so it made sense to keep supplies handy. He reinforced the small table with a charm and stabilized the flame beneath the cauldron, layering shields just in case of an explosion. Then, satisfied, he tidied up and lay down to read for a while before bed. The cauldron bubbled gently in the dark, and Dylan, content, hugged his pillow and fell asleep. Around 3 or 4 in the morning, Harry woke up groggy and half asleep with the all-too-familiar urge to use the loo. He shuffled to the dormitory door, but stumbled as he opened it, his foot catching on something. He swayed and bumped into Dylan's setup by the door. The gold cauldron stayed put, but a clutch of small bottles toppled and crashed across the floor. The cap of one flew off, and the bottle's mouth went straight over the cauldron, spilling a few dried herbs with a soft whoosh into the simmering brew. The cauldron was already thick and gurgling. The herbs sank in and dissolved without an obvious reaction. Still, Harry's eyes snapped wide in terror. His mind supplied one panicked thought. It's over. Dylan will curse me or hex me into something horrible, he thought. Dylan, who had placed an alarm link on the cauldron to wake him if anyone disturbed it, woke the instant the bottles were touched. He blinked into the dimness and took in the scene. Harry standing pale and trembling, the scattered bottles, a herb bottle with its cap missing, a few stems in the potion. He threw off his cover and strode over. Dylan, Harry began, voice shaking. I didn't do it on purpose. Dylan's expression twitched. He cocked his head. I know, you did it on purpose. No, I didn't. Harry scrambled to protest, hands waving. Dylan rolled his eyes and softened. All right, I know you didn't mean to. Go back to bed. He helped Harry back onto his bed, tucking him in, as if the boy hadn't just almost ruined a potion. Harry mumbled that he'd been heading for the bathroom and left quickly when Dylan urged him. Once the door clicked, Dylan knelt, inspected the mess, and picked up the bottle that had spilled. Hellebore, he muttered. Hellebore was a bitter root. If left in the brew too long, it could make the final potion unbearably bitter and give a numbing quality to the mouth. Not ideal, but not catastrophic either. He rubbed his temple. A longer simmer might salvage it. If this tastes off, Professor Lupin can try it and tell us, he said to himself with a crooked smile. Better to let the end user be the tester than waste a whole batch now. He checked the time. Dawn wouldn't be long. Deciding he might as well finish the next stages now, Dylan extinguished the flame beneath the gold cauldron and moved on to the subsequent steps, careful and methodical despite the midnight interruption. Chapter 177, Professor Snape. I will watch him drink it. Dylan had spent the whole morning on the werewolf potion. He only finished brewing it after Ron and the others woke up, the potion Professor Lupin would need for September. It couldn't be consumed on the night of the full moon. That would be useless. It had to be taken for a full week before the full moon to take effect, to keep Lupin rational and in control instead of consumed by bestial urges. Once classes started, Dylan had no time to be brewing potions for anyone. Let Lupin make do with this bitter, astringent brew, enhanced by Harry, no less. Someone had brewed the potion. What more could he want? Dylan didn't hate Lupin exactly, but he wasn't inclined toward him either. Lupin had been so close to Harry's father. He always looked apologetic to Snape afterward. If only he'd stepped in when James and the others bullied Snape. Saying, I dissuaded them later, didn't change what had been done. Still, Lupin had never actually laid hands on Snape. Otherwise, Dylan's dislike would be directed differently. If it had been up to Snape, he would have settled it himself. Perhaps not with a duel, but by other means. A quick, humiliating diarrhea potion at the start of term feast, for example. Dylan had no doubt Snape was capable of such petty cruelty. A special flavored potion personally concocted by young wizard Potter for Lupin. He smirked to himself. Professor Snape will be very pleased when he finds out. He thumbed the crystal bottle, watching the last blue-green residue in the bottom refract sunlight like a cursed lake. The cauldron cleaned, the bitter scent clinging to his fingertips. He tucked the bottle inside his robes, brushed away the stains, and packed his gold and silver cauldrons, along with the more valuable ingredients, into his bag. After breakfast, he went to the Great Hall with Harry and the others, and naturally ran into the professors arriving for the meal. Dylan gave Snape a meaningful look and stepped outside, waiting. Snape appeared quickly, black robes billowing, his stride steady, an elegant, dark flame. He inclined his head and looked down at Dylan, eyes narrowed. What are you thinking? Nothing, Dylan blurted, blinking. Snape's gaze sharpened. Are you sure? Dylan laughed and changed course. This is the potion I brewed all night, Professor. Would you like to see? He withdrew the bottle from his robes and handed it to Snape. The potion's master weighed it in long, bony fingers and tilted it in the light, eyebrows lifting. I smell bitterness. Embarrassed, Dylan scratched his head. Sorry, Professor. This morning, Harry bumped into my ingredient bottles in the loo and some hellebore dropped into the cauldron. Snape paused, eyes moving from the bottle back to Dylan. Hellebore? How much? Not much, Dylan said quickly. 3 to 5 roots, 2 or 3 grams. Even half a gram usually made a potion bitter enough to sicken someone. Snape's fingers rubbed the crystal as he spoke. The potion rippled and reflected the pale morning light. Hellebor's scent clings, he said softly. After a long look, he allowed the corner of his mouth to tilt. A few grams won't ruin it. Hellebore even has detoxifying properties. Right, Dylan said, relieved. That's what I thought, so I didn't waste another batch. Snape glanced at him, then spoke flatly. Since you managed it in one go, the remaining 2 sets of materials will be for October and November. Dylan blinked. What? Snape's voice cut in, measured and cold. This bottle will remain with me. Before the full moon, I will arrange a time and personally watch the new professor take it. Dylan reached out instinctively to stop him. Wait, Professor, don't go, those 2 sets of materials. But Snape only shrugged on his cloak and walked away, ignoring the plea. Students passing by saw the exchange. Dylan was left standing on the steps, hand outstretched and suddenly small. Harry and Ron emerged at that moment. Neville, who'd watched Dylan's face darken, hurried over, concerned. What's wrong? Neville asked. Nothing, Dylan lied. Just a little disappointed. Neville panicked slightly. Chest pain? Should I fetch Madame Pomfrey? Did a Dementor get you? No. Dylan gave a short laugh and shook his head. I'll be fine. Neville followed him all the same, fussing until Dylan reassured him. They had their first class of the day, an elective, divination. Neville fretted about it more than he did about Dylan. If you've got some talent, you'll manage, Dylan said to him. Reading more books will help. Really? Neville's face lit. No, Dylan said with a grin. They climbed the North Tower's spiral stair, dusty like the coils of a sleeping serpent. There wasn't a proper classroom at the top. Students pressed together under a trapdoor, waiting. Dylan stood and watched as a silver ladder suddenly dropped from the ceiling. The classroom's above, he said, and levitated himself up while Neville scrambled up the ladder. The others followed. The divination room was small, more like a secret chamber. The arched ceiling and timber beams were dim and close. The curtains were drawn tight, admitting only slivers of light where dust motes hung like tiny stars. Round tables and floral upholstered armchairs were scattered about, with threadbare cushions lying haphazardly. A huge fireplace burned in one corner, a giant copper teapot perched on the mantel, its spout hissing with steam. The red glow from the hearth made the room oppressively warm. Ron immediately wanted to strip off his robes. Dylan guided Neville to sit against the coolest part of the wall, where it was tolerable. Shelves lined the walls, groaning under broken trinkets, matted quills, dog-eared cards, cracked cups, and nearly spent candles. The whole place looked carelessly cluttered. Dylan flicked his wand. Scourgify. Dust and cobwebs flitted away. Instead of rearranging the oddments, he concentrated on comfort. A few ice crystals spiraled into being, lowering the temperature for him, Neville, and the others. Much better. A soft, otherworldly voice drifted from the shadows. How delightful to see you all in the material world. Truly delightful. Professor Trelawney emerged into the lamplight, thinner than Dylan remembered, her eyes enormous behind heavy-rimmed glasses. She dressed the part, shawl clinking with metal bits, layers of beads at her throat, bracelets and rings chiming as she moved. Crystal balls hanging from the rafters caught the candlelight and flared an eerie purple. A dusty prophecy orb blinked awake and then died again. The skull on the mantel seemed to grin. The spectacle made several pupils shrink in their seats. Do not be shy, children, she said, fluttering to a chair and sitting. Here you will discover whether you possess the inner eye, but first sit. Her entrance had the desired effect. Trelawney spoke in breathy, portentous cadences, telling the students they were privileged to study divination, that most people could never access what she could. Her eyes swept the room and settled briefly on Dylan with a faint, curious smile. I must be frank, she said. If you are not born with the gift, books will not make you seers. The mists of the future are not easily pierced. Neville, beside Dylan, looked at him with obvious envy. It's so lucky you started divination early, Dylan. Your talent, I wish I were like you. Read more, Dylan said. Books still help a lot. Trelawney moved into demonstration, making broad, sweeping prophecies, warnings about a red-haired boy, hints of family troubles, an ominous note about a February lesson plan affected by flu. Dylan heard the artifice. Most of her pronouncements were theatrics, not the crucial revelations she sometimes glimpsed. They were useful for setting mood and offering the occasional important insight, but they weren't the same as the vital prophecies Trelawney sometimes had. It had been a while since Dylan had bothered with her class, but he sat politely. "Could someone hand me the largest silver teacup?" she asked, fixing Lavender Brown with a stare. Lavender, nearest, trembled up to the shelf, brought the cup, and set it before the professor. "Thank you," Trelawney purred. "What you have always feared will come to pass on Friday, October 16th. Lavender squeaked. "Now," Trelawney said, "in pairs, I will teach you to read the shapes of tea leaves." Dylan and Neville were paired. They drank, swirled, and passed their cups to each other. Neville squinted at the bottom of Dylan's teacup, consulted Unfogging the Future, and tried to read something meaningful from a scatter of leaves. "It looks like a top hat," he offered uncertainly. "Maybe. Dylan, you could be a high official in the ministry? The hat is tall." Dylan smiled and turned Neville's cup in his hands. He didn't need the book. The patterns were clear enough to him. "Concentric rings, knots," he said. "You'll find lasting love. Someone will walk with you to the end." Neville's face turned scarlet. He clutched his robes and looked down, mortified and delighted all at once. "Really?" Dylan glanced into his own cup. New shapes slid into view as he rotated it. "There's also a tangled skein, troubles that will come and need patient unraveling," he continued. "And this little triangular shape, like a wizard's hat, suggests you might enter education. You may even stay here and teach at Hogwarts." "Really?" Neville's eyes were huge. "One cup can show so many things?" "Yes," Dylan smiled. "Tea leaves change, and so does destiny." Just as Dylan was giving Neville tips on reading tea leaves, Professor Trelawney suddenly darted out of the shadows with astonishing speed. Her bony fingers, like eagle talons, snatched Harry's teacup. Silver bracelets chimed on her wrist like tiny wind chimes. The vibration made the tea leaves in Harry's cup shift and rearrange, and they formed a winding, snake-like pattern. A single undissolved tea stem became the snake's eye. "A snake. It seems you have an enemy," she murmured. Hermione, sitting at the same table, slammed her copy of Unfogging the Future, shut so hard the thick pages thwacked and sent the augury birds on the windowsill fluttering into the air. "Harry's enemy? Which one do you mean? He has a lot of enemies." Harry blinked. "Not really." Hermione ignored him and glared at Trelawney. After discovering that this elective couldn't be mastered directly from books, she had grown openly dissatisfied with divination. How could a subject be taught by pointing to shapes in tea leaves that looked like nothing at all? The whole thing seemed unreasonable. Worse, Hermione hadn't sensed any genuine divinatory power from Trelawney. The professor's pronouncements were always so vague. Dylan's earlier comments had nagged at her. Divination wasn't a rich course. It rarely allowed someone to truly master prophecy. Could Trelawney herself be faking it? The classroom's gloomy atmosphere and Hermione's own lack of aptitude for divination made it hard for her to see anything in the leaves. If it weren't for Dylan, who had actually shown her some real divinatory talent, she might have begun to doubt prophecy's existence altogether. "Prophecy requires a hazy beauty, my dear," Trelawney said, barely glancing at Hermione before averting her eyes. "And child, prophecies cannot be given freely. That would entangle the diviner in karma. But Dylan can do divination, and he always states the result outright," Hermione snapped. At the mention of Dylan, Trelawney paused. Then, with a flash of proprietorial pride, she said, "Dylan is the diviner I once taught. He is talented, but you, my dear, the light about you is very dim. It's a pity. You will find tasting the flavor of prophecy difficult." She glanced at Dylan, saw no reaction, and relaxed a little. Then she held Harry's teacup up again. "A hammer. I think this is a skull crusher. It represents an attack. Oh dear, something bad seems to be coming for you." "Skull crusher?" Ron blurted. "Isn't that— Wait, a skeleton? Oh my, wait! That's danger!" Trelawney's face suddenly tightened as if she had seen something move. Then she froze, her expression shifting sharply. As if struck by an invisible force, she lurched backward and collapsed heavily onto the empty cushion beside her. Her wide shawl flared like a thestral's wings, and the cards under the cushion rose on the gust, scattering. The topmost card was unmistakably death. Trelawney grabbed her chest, her closed eyes trembling. Her head rocked from side to side as if to shake off a horrible vision. Don't ask that child. Poor child, don't say it. Her reaction didn't look like a con. Dylan felt a prick of unease. Had she seen something genuine? Dean, at another table, leaned over to peer into the teacup Trelawney had dropped. This doesn't look like anything. Several students stood and clustered around Harry and Ron to see the pattern for themselves. Trelawney's eyes flew open and she cried out, voice suddenly full of raw urgency. If you glimpse the skeletal hound wandering among the desolate tombs, beware. Every inch of scorched earth it treads will sprout thorny mandrakes. Within those stamens is condensed the wailing of the dead, a cry even eternal night cannot swallow. What? Harry looked baffled. Professor, what are you talking about? A great dog, a gloomy great dog, an omen of death. Sparks burst from the tip of Siamus's wand. Dylan's mouth curved in a faint, ironic smile. It seemed Trelawney had seen something, but to call a dog an omen of doom for Harry struck him as absurd. After all, Harry himself was Hogwarts' biggest omen of doom. The students' strange looks made no sense. Hermione was jostled by the crowd and sprang to her feet, hair like a lion's mane. Those closest to her backed away, startled. Hey, be careful. She ignored them and fixed Trelawney with a scathing stare. Your statements are wildly exaggerated. This looks like a cross with a rising sun to me. How can that be inauspicious? What does it have to do with an omen of doom? Trelawney took a few shuddering breaths to steady herself, then scanned Hermione with thinly veiled displeasure. I'm sorry, my dear, but the light about you truly is dimmer than I imagined. Your perception of the future is lacking. As a common person, I understand the distress of being unable to glimpse what's to come. There was something pathetic about Trelawney's insistence, as Dylan had felt before. If a professor lacked genuine authority, they sometimes kept up appearances in odd ways. Trelawney's theatricality seemed a means of preserving whatever dignity she could. This was not Lockhart flamboyance, just a desperate maintenance of credibility. All right, she said at last, wariness creeping into her voice. We'll end today's lesson here. I am no longer able to glimpse the future. She made a vague, impatient wave and wouldn't meet Hermione's eyes. Questioning her in class must have exhausted her. Better to let the student go. Take your things. Don't leave anything behind, children. Trelawney swayed back into the shadows and, in the next instant, seemed to vanish from view. Dylan watched her go. Not magic, he muttered to himself. More like a muggle illusion. He sent Neville, Harry, and the others on while he lingered in the classroom. After most students left, a movement in the shadows revealed a head of wild, bushy hair peering out. They're all gone? The figure asked. Yes, Professor, came the reply. Trelawney breathed a visible sigh of relief. Each class gives me a headache. I don't know how to handle these thorny young wizards most of the time. Dylan smiled and asked, Professor, you've studied the books thoroughly. Have you found any way to improve one's divination talent? Trelawney's eccentricity vanished as she regarded him calmly. Child, many records are mere tricks or useless methods for someone like me. I have tried many ways, but I have little talent for divination, except at certain special moments. He didn't reply. Whether his own system rewards could ever help others here, he didn't know. Trelawney shrugged and offered, Don't worry about me. As long as I have a place at the school, I'm content. A small smile tugged at her lips. She moved to the table where Dylan had been sitting and peered into his teacup. Oh, a top hat. Are you going to be a high-ranking official in the future? Dylan started to answer when her brow suddenly tightened and her face drained of color. Her eyes rolled back and she closed them. For a moment, it was as if she were under control. Then, in a trembling, chanting cadence, she began to speak in a voice that didn't feel fully her own. From the dark abyss, the Demon King's power is stirring, and his followers, devout in darkness, prepare their ritual. The world will be draped in fear and shadow. No one will be able to resist him, not even the old Demon King nor the Savior. Dylan startled. Then, as if waking from a nightmare, Trelawney blinked and looked at him, bewildered. Child, what just happened to me? Dylan narrowed his eyes and then lifted his chin, innocent-faced. Nothing at all, Professor. What do you mean? She scratched at her head. The bracelets chimed. Why do I feel like I just lost consciousness? How could you know you lost consciousness if you really had? Dylan asked mildly. She blinked and conceded the point. Dylan felt the prophecy he'd overheard might be connected to him somehow. He couldn't stay. I have another class, Professor. I won't disturb you any longer. Oh, of course. Class is important. Hurry along, child. Trelawney nodded and began to tidy the used teacups. Dylan tapped his wand and cast Scourgify. Threads of magic wound around the tea-stained cups. Where the light touched, the stains melted away. The cups gleamed clean, and with a wave, returned to the center of each table, neatly arranged. You're welcome, Professor. I'll be going now. Dylan smiled. Oh, child, your control is precise. Keep it up. He left and hurried down to the next class. The Transfiguration classroom wasn't close to the North Tower, so Neville and the others hadn't waited for him. With a little magical help in his legs, Dylan practically flew and soon caught up with the main group. Hey, Dylan, Neville waved. Dylan dispelled the extra magic and walked the rest of the way. What kind of spell was that? I felt like you were almost flying, Ron asked, surprised. Just a small enhancement. Difficult to learn, Dylan replied casually. Ron looked plaintive. Was Dylan saying even if Ron learned it, he might not be able to? He grumbled, as Ron does. Harry, though, had a worried frown. He watched Dylan and then hesitated. About Professor Trelawney's prophecy, do you think it could happen? The omen of death? Dylan patted his shoulder. Harry, I didn't see any ill omen. I didn't see any threat either. Don't worry. If I ever see you truly facing death, I'll tell you the day before. He gave a half-joking grin. Then, when you're dying, you won't have to do homework or revise for exams. Have a good meal and be sure to curse anyone you want to curse. Harry nearly laughed. Dylan's reassurance eased him. The tension in his shoulders dropped some. He still felt uncomfortable with classmates' furtive looks, but he walked on with the others. They all found their seats for Professor McGonagall's transfiguration. Dylan and Neville sat in the first row. Hermione, not to be outdone, claimed the first seat opposite them. Behind her sat Ron and Harry. You are now in your third year, Professor McGonagall said, standing straight at the podium, her robes falling perfectly. Her stern gaze swept the students from behind square spectacles. She seemed to sense that her class was unusually distracted. With a hard tap of her wand on the podium, she commanded, Concentrate. Today I will introduce to you one of the highest achievements of Transfiguration, the animagus. A soft glow gathered around McGonagall. As the light shimmered, her tall figure shrank, robes and hair dissolved into radiance. In a blink, a sleek tabby cat sat on the podium, eyes bright and sharp with her usual authority. The cat prowled a delicate path around the stand, the perfect example of an animagus. Then the light reclaimed her. Professor McGonagall returned to human form, smoothed her robes, and fixed them all with a stern look. Despite her demonstration, the students' attention was only half there. McGonagall's frown deepened. Who can tell me what happened? What has left you so dispirited that you cannot even pay attention to my class? Chapter 179. Malfoy is so afraid of you. It's probably not just because you're good at scolding him. Professor McGonagall's words died away. The students in the room couldn't help turning to look at Harry, but no one spoke. Hermione, sitting in the front row on the left, raised her hand and addressed McGonagall. I think everyone was influenced by divination earlier. When she was reading the tea leaves, Professor Trelawney cursed Harry. Cursed? McGonagall arched an eyebrow. Dylan shook his head. No, Professor, it wasn't a curse. It was a prophecy from Professor Trelawney. McGonagall frowned. She made another prophecy? Hermione hurried on. Yes, I think her prophecy is nonsense. McGonagall's expression softened. Did she say Harry might die? Hermione blinked, then nodded. Professor, how did you know? She said Harry was about to meet the omen of death. Harry's face remained calm. He'd already heard Dylan's reinterpretation. I don't think we need to make too much of it, he said. McGonagall continued, deliberately steady. Especially you, Potter. Don't be scared. Ever since the divination professor returned to the school, I've heard a string of prophecies every year. Death, omens, doom, it's always the same, and I've yet to see a student die in any year. She greets every new face with the darkest of possibilities. This year, it's your turn. McGonagall paused, a trace of helplessness crossing her features. I don't like speaking ill of colleagues. She looked around at the students, then stopped herself. Complaining about a colleague to pupils would be indelicate, even for her. She took a breath and steadied herself. In any case, I don't believe divination belongs in the core of magical knowledge, at least not for me. I have no patience for it, and I won't play shaman with cards and crystal balls. As for your divination professor, don't waste time trying to decode her words. There's nothing to decode. Children, remember this. True seers don't give a flood of prophecies. They give only what is crucial. Sometimes even the most crucial must stay secret. When McGonagall spoke of divination, her tone grew kinder toward the students. It was clear she had little respect for Trelawney. If even McGonagall, who was usually tolerant, thought so poorly of her, one could imagine what the others thought. As she spoke, McGonagall glanced at Dylan. If you see a good omen, accept it with joy. If you see a bad one, assume it's wrong, and don't let worry take hold. Dylan fluttered his lashes and chuckled inwardly. Did he say it that poetically? He couldn't remember. McGonagall looked at Harry. You seem very relaxed, Potter. It sounds like someone has already guided you. One more thing. Your health seems perfectly fine to me. So I won't excuse you from homework because of a divination, unless you actually meet that non-existent bad omen. Only then will I consider excusing you. Harry was momentarily stunned, then smiled. The words sounded familiar. Dylan had already told him not to worry. Hadn't Dylan predicted he'd be all right? As for the black dog he'd once seen, perhaps it was coincidence. A dog couldn't bring disaster, could it? After Transfiguration class ended, Dylan and Hermione didn't leave with the rest. Instead, using the time turner, they went back through the day to reattend the earlier class. Time felt strange as they reversed through it. The scenery seemed to unwind. They returned to the moment before the second class and hurried to the next room. Professor Vector wasted no time. Her teaching style was stricter even than McGonagall's. She barely explained anything before sending the students to work. Hermione sat beside Dylan. She didn't know anyone else in the elective, so it was natural for her to take the seat next to him. Watching Dylan write with lightning speed, she finally leaned close and spoke softly. Dylan, you're a true seer, so I'll ask you directly. Dylan kept his head down, writing. What? That woman in divination, do you think she's really a prophet? Or do you think she's a fraud? Her performance doesn't look like that of a true seer, more like a charlatan. Dylan paused, then asked without looking up, Do you think I'm a prophet? Hermione was startled, then brightened. Of course, I said you're truly gifted. Dylan lifted his head slightly. Then do you think I might be deceiving people? Or if I were to deceive you now, would you believe me? Hermione was taken aback. She didn't immediately grasp the point, so Dylan went back to his notebook and resumed working. He had read about arithmancy before class and had once mistakenly thought it was probability theory. Professor Vector swiftly corrected him. Arithmancy wasn't about chance, but calculation. Numbers tied to letters, to constellations, to personality. Vector explained that instead of reading tea leaves or crystal balls, arithmancers convert names and other data into numbers, then perform mathematical operations to derive things like a personality number, a soul number, and a social number. Those numbers are then interpreted to analyze a person's character and destiny. Whether the results are accurate is another matter. True seers don't need arithmetic, while those without prophetic gifts might fare better with numbers than with staring into a cup of leaves. Are you saying Professor Trelawney isn't a fraud? Hermione asked. No, Dylan said. I'm saying that whether someone has prophetic ability or not, what they offer you are reports of future events. Since the future hasn't happened yet, how can you be certain whether they're speaking genuinely or just acting? Hermione frowned. That's easy to verify. Of course, but the other person could choose not to tell the whole truth, or only half of it, Dylan shrugged. What reason would a prophet have to tell you everything? Hermione chewed her lip. And if a prophet doesn't tell the truth, is it because they can't, to avoid changing the future, or are they deliberately withholding to try to change things? How could you tell the difference? She fell quiet, thinking. Arithmancy made her feel better than staring blankly at tea leaves. She finished the calculation on her parchment, and Dylan checked his answer against hers. They matched. You actually have a knack for divination too, Dylan said with a smile. Just in a different form. Hermione's expression was serious. I understand what you mean, Dylan, but I still don't think she's genuine. Dylan shrugged. You've already made up your mind, so accept your conclusion. Then Hermione's eyes lit up, as if she'd discovered something. That bit McGonagall said about believing good prophecies and not believing bad ones, wasn't that something you said? I think I heard you say that before. That's terrible logic. That attitude is actually what a real seer should have, Dylan replied. Hermione's face brightened as if she'd found a new continent. When Professor Vector acknowledged their correct answers, they were praised. Vector even allowed them to chat briefly during class, as long as they didn't disturb others. Hermione seized the opening. The future someone gives you might be deceptive, but the future will still come. So we just wait for the future to arrive, and then we'll know whether the prophet was a fraud, she added. That's a fine bit of nonsense. And then what? Dylan clicked his tongue. Undeterred, Hermione went on. A true seer wouldn't demand that everyone accept their prophecy. People can choose whether to believe. But this professor always tries to force everyone to accept her readings, so I think she's a fraud. A very specific point of view, Dylan said. If that's what you believe, then accept it. Hermione's excitement faded and she slumped back into her seat. Fraud or not, she did say something that's true. I'm afraid I don't have the knack to enjoy seeing the future. She sighed. I simply have no talent for divination. Dylan chuckled. Most people don't. Like many muggles can't become witches or wizards. Otherwise, our school would be full. Full? Hermione looked surprised. Full? I nearly didn't get a seat on the train. Dylan glanced at her. So are you going to drop the class? Very few people are talented in divination, but someone always gets a top mark each year. You. No, Hermione's head snapped back. I won't give up my self-respect just to get a perfect score by currying favor. If a professor already has an opinion of me and I have to flatter her to win marks or spend my time coaxing prophecies out of tea leaves only to be handed a bad omen, then I'd rather not get that perfect score. I'd rather drop the class completely. Dylan shrugged. Holding on to your principles is good. Once you decide, move forward without regrets. Around them, other students were turning in their work to Professor Vector. Some were right, some wrong. The professor didn't scold those who erred. She patiently explained the mistakes. Hermione looked and then looked away. I think I'll get a perfect mark in this subject. At least this professor's more reasonable. No matter what, it's not a good idea to call others abnormal, Dylan said. Hermione's face went sheepish. Oh, right. Then why did you, last time, and the time before that, and the time before that, scold Malfoy until he cried? She asked. Dylan froze, then gave an awkward grin. Wasn't that because he picked on other students first? I'm not one to scold, but that doesn't mean I should ignore rudeness when I see it. You know students aren't supposed to fight or duel, and certainly not use curses. I was trying to steer Malfoy toward better behavior with some earnest instruction. Hermione's mouth twitched. He's so afraid of you. I don't think it's just because you're good at scolding him. No way. Don't say that. I didn't, Dylan protested. After class, Dylan sat in the dining hall, turning the time turner over in his hand, mulling over its operating principle. The device felt oddly familiar. Although he'd hardly ever used the pensieve in Old Deng's office, the two seemed to rely on the same ancient runes. The difference was that the time turner also involved some form of alchemy he didn't yet understand. Alchemy. My research here is embarrassingly shallow, he thought. He took a sip of orange juice. Maybe it was time to ask Old Deng to take him on as an apprentice. Old Deng's alchemy was renowned. If Dylan could study under him, learn Gubrathian fire too, his skills would improve quickly. Still, electives took up too much time. He appreciated hearing professors' perspectives in class, but he couldn't spend himself on every optional subject. After this semester, he still hadn't figured out the time turner's true principle, and he couldn't afford to repeat the effort next year. That kind of endless digging would drive him mad. After lunch, the next class was Care of Magical Creatures. Neville was absent, but Harry came, and a few Slytherins were in attendance. Hermione leaned over to Dylan and noticed the book in his hands was perfectly still, just an ordinary-looking book, nothing like the vicious thing she expected. She raised an eyebrow. Why is yours quiet like that? Mine's driving me crazy. Dylan glanced and saw Hermione holding the Monster Book of Monsters, tightly wrapped in crude bandages as if it were a restrained wild dog. Something rustled between the pages. "It's simple," he said. "I removed the transfiguration charm that was placed on it. You can make it behave the same way." As he spoke, he reached out and touched the spine of the book Hermione was clutching. The gesture was light, but the monster book shuddered violently, like it had been jolted, and then it went completely still. No more thrashing, no more struggling. It lay obediently in Hermione's arms. "If you want it usually active but quiet on demand, that's the way to do it," Dylan added. Hermione's face lit up. She carefully unwrapped the bandages, staying ready to fling the book away at any moment. To her astonishment, nothing happened. She opened it eagerly. She'd bought the book long ago, but had never been able to read it because it always tried to bite her. This was the only course she hadn't been able to preview. "Why didn't you tell me to do this earlier?" she asked. "So you can answer questions in class," Dylan said, clicking his tongue. The students nearby, seeing what he'd done, stared and then started whispering to one another. Hagrid hadn't put any instructions about taming the monster book on the course list, so almost no one knew how to quiet one. Even many Slytherins hadn't read such books. Their families hadn't taught them. Some pure-blood families might know how, but out of pride, their children often preferred to bind the books themselves with tape or wrap them up rather than ask for help. People tried everything: bands, stuffing them in backpacks, clamping them with tweezers, so the idea of making one obedient without restraints impressed everyone. After the castle, Dylan followed Hermione and Harry to Hagrid's hut. Since Hagrid taught the class, he held it on his own grounds. Hagrid was standing at his door waving, his face split in a big, eager grin. "Hi! Hurry up, little ones. When we're all here, follow me. Don't lag behind, or who knows what you'll find in the Forbidden Forest," he warned, giving them an exaggerated nod. He glanced at Dylan as he stepped into the trees. Dylan met his gaze and looked away, not wanting to encourage whatever Hagrid had in mind. Hagrid had even asked Ron to arrange a midnight meeting with Dylan in the forest, but Dylan had declined. He didn't have the time, and Hagrid had only just started his job. He fell in behind the group at an easy pace, never appearing rushed despite Hagrid's long strides. At the back, Malfoy, trailing behind, suddenly snapped the strap he used to restrain his own monster book and lashed it against the cover. "I can't believe Hogwarts lets an idiot like him teach," Malfoy sneered loudly. "This school's finished. Might as well let the Dementors teach the kids." Smack! He whipped the book again. It trembled but didn't bite. Malfoy seemed to enjoy the sound of it and struck harder. "If my father heard about this, he'd have a fit." Harry, passing by, stopped and shot him a sharp look. "Enough, Malfoy. You talk too much." Malfoy curled his lip at Harry. "Oh, look, the boy who lived, scared silly on the train. Those Dementors won't even eat you." Dylan barely registered the exchange. He was thinking about the Time Turner and the Dementors he'd recently captured. 7 had been taken, but the achievement rewards had been disappointing. He'd planned to find some spare time to give those Dementors a proper torment back in his private space. He'd toy with them to see if it would trigger any further achievements. Of course, they wouldn't actually die. They reached the edge of the Forbidden Forest and Hagrid halted. He told them to stand where they were and ducked behind a massive tree. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the canopy in patches of gold. The smell of damp earth and animal droppings hung in the air. When Hagrid reemerged, his shoulders brushed moss loose as he walked, and a clatter of iron announced what he was holding. A dozen heavy chains, links as thick as a wrist, each clanging against the next. At the other ends were a dozen hippogriffs. The creatures stepped out from the grass on powerful horse-like legs. Their heads were eagle-like, beaks sheathed in honey-colored keratin. When they opened and closed them, you could see the deep crimson membrane in their mouths. Satin gray fur covered their equine bodies, and their manes curled like a burst of copper wire. Bulging muscles rippled over their shoulders. "Hippogriffs," Hermione breathed, eyes wide. She'd only read about them in books. She hadn't expected to see any in person. "Aren't they beautiful?" Hagrid said proudly, pointing out their amber eyes and fluffy feathers. He was practically vibrating with excitement. "But don't forget, dangerous." Very dangerous. Hermione knit her brows. I read they can break a person's bones with a single wing beat. How can we be asked to get this close on our first class? Hagrid laughed off the worry. They are proud creatures? That's true, he said. And proud creatures are more likely to throw a tantrum. So don't you go insulting them. That's how you get yourself hurt. One of the hippogriffs nearest to them raised its head and scanned the students with vertical slit amber eyes. It sniffed twice and exhaled a pair of white puffs from its nostrils. Hagrid patted its neck and gave the chain a gentle tug. Dylan watched the animals and found himself thinking of Newt Scamander. How much more interesting the class might be if Newt were the professor. Newt's knowledge of magical creatures would be far more detailed. He'd know their habits and behavior intimately. Hagrid, bless him, loved creatures and taught with enthusiasm, but Newt would have offered depth. Hagrid's voice cut through his thoughts. Right, listen up. What I'm about to say is important. These little fellows are proud. You must not offend them or make rude gestures. Wait for them to make the first move. Do you understand? That's the politeness they expect. He let the hippogriffs move a little closer, keeping a careful distance himself, and watched them watch the students.